Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place we crunch the political issues and cut through the politicians' spin. I've got another interesting show ahead for you this week, and my first guest this afternoon will be Hehir, an ardent National Party supporter who seems to think he'll end up disappointed by a national-led government. We discuss these feelings and debrief the election from the viewpoint of a National Party supporter. And then I'll be talking with Gary Moller about his thoughts post-election, missed opportunities, health, nutrition, and what the new government must do about all that. We'll dip into the mailbag, of course, and then it'll be time for a chat with my buddies to find out what their thoughts are about Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown a year on from his election. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@Reality Check Radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Almost 5 years ago, on the 28th of October 2018, I awoke at 6 a.m, unable to use my right arm, half of my face slumped, and with a very wonky walk. After an earlier brush with Bell's palsy 2 years prior, the symptoms are very similar. I knew the tests that you needed to check to see if you'd had a stroke. My heart was racing faster than I'd ever experienced, with panic attacks and depression. In short, I felt like I'd been run over. There was no pain. However, I had zero strength. The ambulance seemed to take an age. It was probably only 10 minutes. And they were only in the house for about 20 minutes, and then I was bundled in the back of the ambulance and driven to hospital. I finally got to drive on the Northern Expressway. Sounds silly, but it's something that I always wanted to do. But it was not an ideal situation, and my life had changed, and not for the better. Little did I know, but the stroke was the least of my troubles. The first inkling of those troubles was receiving media inquiries within 30 minutes of arriving at the hospital. How did they know? It caused me not inconsiderable stress. And I know who those pricks are, and they will never, ever be getting anything from me ever again. With such a massive privacy breach, I was loath to stay at North Shore Hospital, but in any case, it was decided to transfer me to the stroke unit at Auckland Hospital after several tests and scans. I don't know if you know, but when you have a stroke, some things are not obvious, but seriously affect you. One thing that affected me was my hearing had become extremely sensitive. It still is. I can hear people clearly talking across a room, even if they are talking in hushed tones. I can also focus on a conversation across a room, even if there are others around making lots of exceedingly annoying noise. But sounds in general have become annoying, especially whining or squealing children. Another side effect of my stroke, because of where the stroke was located, was my already low tolerance for stupidity, coupled with a propensity to say out loud what others would only think was heightened. In other words, I just blurted things out. I had no control over it. And so you can imagine what people thought when I would just come out and say things out of the blue. The biggest issue I had was my exceedingly high blood pressure. And it hovered around 200 over 120 for a couple of days until through trial and error they stabilized it via medication. One test they performed on the day of my discharge after a week in hospital was to establish clinically if I would ever regain the use of my arm again. It involved placing a figure-of-8 shaped electrode over the site of the stroke on my head and recording electrical impulses in my arm on electrodes down the arm. The grim faces of the medical guys conducting the test told me everything I needed to know. And when they wanted to do the tests again, then I knew it was bad. They told me I'd never use my right arm again. It was that blunt. And they got a senior, respected neurologist to come and explain it to me. And that was a pretty low moment. Thankfully, the neurologist then told me that I'd have to learn to do everything with my left hand. And I asked him, like what? And he said, like writing. Great, I said, pass a pen, no time like the present, and started writing something on a piece of paper. What I wrote was, you clearly haven't read my notes. I'm left-handed. And that certainly lightened the mood for a moment. But at that moment, I resolved to prove the experts wrong. Can't isn't a word I recognize, and a word I seldom use. Can't is what other people say. I told the specialist they were wrong, and I left hospital determined to prove them wrong. I was sent home then, but the next morning I was pretty crook. My blood pressure went through the roof again, and the doctor called an ambulance. Back to hospital I went, and back to my privacy being breached again at North Shore Hospital. Suffice to say, I was back in Auckland Hospital under an assumed name where they found that my potassium levels had dropped to dangerous, life-threatening levels. That was 5 years ago. And as I lay there in the hospital, I took stock of my life. I was profoundly changed by this experience, but it has taken almost 5 years to get things sorted in my life. Nearly dying focuses one's mind, and I realized that for 30 years I had neglected my faith. But first I had to fix my body, and then my mind, and finally I found the bandwidth to address my faith. I was stubborn and determined to heal, and I'm the type of person that refuses to ever quit. I fixed my body by diving deep into physiotherapy, and I've regained almost full use of my arm as a result. I never gave up and never gave in. There were still issues to overcome, though, including a frozen shoulder, which is extremely painful, and reactivating muscles and tendons is rather painful too. But I never gave up and never gave in, and went day after day to physio. And by the time the whoop-pox hit, I was used to being isolated. But the worst thing was Ardern's kindness stopped my physio. You cannot fathom how frustrating that had been, and how detrimental to my recovery as well. But that's Jacinda Ardern's kindness for you. So here we are, 5 years later. I'm fit, I'm healthy, I defied all the experts' prognoses, and now my risk of another stroke is dramatically reduced. One thing that I learned from my stroke experience is that if it is to be, it is up to thee. And this means that you must do it yourself, and you must not wait. When the occupational therapist came to assess me, I had already made great strides in recovery. I was past whatever support they could offer, and that's because I backed myself and got superb assistance privately. And that is why I continue to attend physio. I'm still finding improvements as each week goes by. Normally, people find they plateau after 6 months. I never have. And I put that down to my dogmatic and some would say selfish, single-minded mission to recover. When I left the hospital, it was with a prognosis of never being able to use my right arm or hand again. They said that things might improve slightly for the first 3 months, but by 6 months, it would stop. I told the doctors they were wrong, and it just goes to show that my pig-headed stubbornness and never-say-die attitude is a help, not a hindrance. But imagine how much better I'd have been if we didn't have the lockdowns which prevented even more physiotherapy. Stopping critical physiotherapy for stroke victims was hardly kindness. How many stopped altogether rather than keep on trying to recover? It's disappointing, depressing, challenging, and at the same time rewarding, invigorating, and satisfying to see those little improvements happen week after week, month after month, year after year. It has been mentally and physically draining recovering from the stroke. And that's why I took a whole year off from any work right at the start. It's why I still only do 1 article a day, even now. And just so you know, to do this show each week takes almost an entire day or preparation and planning for just 3 hours on air. But the thing you find out when you have a life-changing medical event like this is just precisely who your friends are, who are there for you and who are not. Those who are not aren't worth the time. I cut them from my life and I don't miss them at all. Those who are there for you are treasures. Those of you who are there for me know who you are. And I thank you most profusely for the support you've given me and those around me. And so, now, 5 long years have elapsed. The struggle continues. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And I'm not going away. But I'll continue to develop a better life and work balance, and I'm taking up new hobbies and starting some new projects for relaxation. And there are certainly many more challenges ahead, like finding out what continues to deplete my potassium is still a work in progress. But like everything, I'll eventually solve that one too. And contrary to what the doctors predicted, I do have the use of my right arm. Now, I can't yet type with that hand, but it's getting slowly but surely stronger and more dexterous. It won't recover fully, and there will always be an impairment. But even so, I'm a better person both mentally and physically despite my impairment, and certainly better than most people. And I describe myself as enhanced rather than impaired. At some stage, I might write a book or sit with someone who will write it for me. There is so much to tell about, and not just the past 5 years, but also the things that I've done in my life that few people know about. I've certainly had plenty of time to think about it, and there is lots to tell. Eventually, the other side of what the media and my opponents have said will need to be told. Then people will see the real me, not the dark, cartoonish persona my opponents attempted to pigeonhole me as. The truth will out, and that time is coming. For now, I'll keep on keeping on. I know that the mere fact that I'm living and breathing gives my political enemies cold comfort. I still live rent-free in their tiny, feeble minds, and the funny thing is, even after a serious stroke like I've had, I'm still better at what I do than all of them combined. I'm well on the road to a near full recovery, and I have lots more that I want to achieve. And you will see them happen because I won't be deterred from achieving those goals. 5 years is a long time, but is a blink in the eye, really, when you look at your life in total. And I'm so grateful that I've had lots of people around me to support me as I recover. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. 5 years is a big chunk of my life, and I wanted to share that journey with you.
Want an easier way to listen to RCR? Well, you can now download the brand new Reality Check Radio app, both on iOS and Android. We've completed our beta testing, and the app is now live. You can visit the app stores direct or find out all you need to know at www.realitycheck.radio/app. That's at realitycheck.radio/app. Our test bunnies have been hard at play to ensure you have access to everything, from listening to our live broadcast, downloading some of our incredible interviews, and checking out the latest blogs, all from the very same app. So get listening and download the RCR app now.
Liam Hehir is a staunch National Party supporter, but he describes himself as a little squishy these days. He wrote a memo to Christopher Luxon, so we'll discuss that, along with his thoughts about the election campaign, the results, and where to from here. He's on the line now to discuss the results of the election with me. Welcome to The Crunch.
Hello.
Good to have you here. I've been following your articles, your Substack and your tweets, and I've always had a bit of a soft spot for some of the points that you make, even if you are a blinkered, sycophantic National Party person. That's about the level of beat up you're going to get from me today.
I think that's completely fair. Over the years, I started out writing about politics in 2013, so 2011 for the Mandatory Standard and stuff and things like that. And at the time, I've always been a National Party sort of guy. I'm like dairy farmer's son, and that's sort of just sort of the tribe that I belong to, I guess. But I certainly was a lot more right wing than I am now, and the reason why I've sort of become a lot less sort of outspoken or a lot less sort of radical is simply just I've become really pessimistic over the years. I've become really pessimistic about what can be achieved politically, and so my standards are just a lot lower. And it's a loss of hope, really. Like I did an interview with Damien Grant, and he just said, "You're just supporting the National Party out of sort of not believing that better things are possible." And I was like, "Yeah, that's basically me right now."
Yeah, it's interesting you say it, because people accuse me of being a tribal National Party supporter, but they clearly haven't kept up with developments at least since 2014, where effectively I felt the National Party chucked me under the bus to suit a political narrative. And not whilst I accept that at some point, it opened my eyes up to the fact that I believe that they're the party of the status quo. They very rarely make significant changes, and they like to tout themselves as efficient managers of the economy, of the things that the Labour Party did. So
I think that's completely fair. And so, first of all, you've never really been a National Party sycophant like I am. Right, like even back in the glory days, you were always involved in the internal strife within the party. Like it wasn't like a party line. You weren't David Farrer, because the quickest thing for David, is a friend of mine too, is that whenever if you want to see what way the wind is blowing, look to where Kiwi Blog is, and that's where the National Party is going with things. But that was never really the case with your old blog. No. But for me personally, I just think, yeah, you're right. And, the National Party doesn't, it makes changes at the margins. And historically, sometimes it has rolled back big things. But what you're getting out of the National Party is a slower acceleration towards the cliff, perhaps, and, more skillful driving. But it's not going to fundamentally change the politics of this country. But I've always had the view, it's like what that guy Andrew Breitbart said, that if you have a fundamentally left-wing media, you have a left-wing civil society, all the charities are left-wing, you turn on TV, you're getting left-wing messages, you can't expect that the elected government is going to be anything other than sort of soft left. And so I've always just felt that politics has been about choosing between the least worst alternative, really. And I know it's really it's not inspiring, right? But it's just where I've got to in life.
Yeah, it's the old saying is that you have to learn to swallow dead rats. But it's funny you mentioned Andrew Breitbart, because many years ago, this left wing foghorn on Twitter, as it was then, had his own blog, a guy called Peter Aranyi, had a meeting with me. He said, you know what, you're just like Andrew Breitbart. And he was meaning it as an insult. Yeah. And I thought, hang on a second, this guy's a multimillionaire. He's founded a news network. He's talked about all around the world. Yeah, that sounds like me. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So,
that guy Peter Aranyi is kind of weird. He had a thing where he would go after me for a long time. Is he still kicking around? Does he do anything? Yeah,
he's very obsessive. A strange man who when you meet him, his first thing he says is, "I used to work with Paul Holmes," and my answer to that was, "So what?"
Like in the 90s. What a thing to hang on to.
I know. It seems he has a falling out with almost everybody, and he seems to be a very bitter man. Very smart, can be erudite as well, but just bitter and snarky. And, unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of humorless people on the left. And, I look back on the things that have been described about me, especially by Nikki Hager, who's probably the most bitter person I've ever met. But, he wrote a book and said there was this vast conspiracy of people that were working to do this and do that and undermine that. But because he never asked us why we did what we did when we were writing. And if he had, I would have said, for fun. I'd do it for fun.
Yeah. I've got to confess, I've personally never had anything that very pleasant interactions with him, possibly because I'm trying to make sure he never writes a book about me. But my criticism of him is that, if you're doing journalism, you need to put the other side, you need to put it to the other side, right? And so I think there's this fear that, somehow there'd be an injunction taken out prohibiting the publication of the book, which means that, rush to press, keep it under wraps, don't tell the other people that the book's being written about them, and don't get their side of it. And there were some. Well, I think the one that I think was quite bad. One that sticks in memory anyway is the Princess Party allegations and dirty politics, where there was some party in Palmerston North of all places that Farrer was going, and without context, it sounded like it was some sort of nefarious, hitting on girls while the drunk thing. But it turned out it was just, it was about the royal wedding. And
it's exactly what it was. It was a royal wedding. Yeah. There was about 20 people in a room having a few beers, and it was the most boring party out. In fact, I went elsewhere because it was just so National Party people are pretty boring, really. Yeah. And, that was just nothing, and it was blown out of context. You're right; it was blown out of context. It was pathetic.
Yeah, the National Party people are very boring.
Oh yeah,
you're right about that. People think that the average National Party person is like some, plutocrat in a shark skin suit, but it's actually normally some old man in a woolly jumper, with old man breath, or a young net nerd. People have these ideas about the National Party. You can tell that they've never ever been to a single National Party conference.
And I've done plenty of those, and but I'm no longer a member of the National Party, so maybe I should hand in my sealskin hubcaps.
Are you a member of any party, or you?
No, I'm not a member.
Never going to go down that path again?
No, I'm never going to go down that path again. I've thrown partisan politics aside. I'm actually enjoying what we're doing here at Reality Check Radio, and yes, I have my opinions, I have my views, I have my own personal biases, but it's not attributable to any one party or any. I've been accused of being a Winston Peters sycophant, but if only they could, if only they could make a GoPro that would last 9 hours, and we'd just set it up and watch Winston and I over a couple of whiskies and some cigars, just absolutely going hammer and tongs at each other, disagreeing with each other. And that's the thing that I think is missing from New Zealand politics these days, is the ability to discuss things with people that you might be implacably opposed to, but you can have a civil discussion about it.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And it's one thing that's really interesting, though, is, every now and then I'll do a bit of TV work, and I'll do Q&A or The Nation or whatever. And in the green room, you'll sometimes meet people that have heard go at you on social media, and the biggest pussies And like when it comes to fronting up in person, they're nice as anything. It's only the cowardice of social media that makes them horrible. And I think that's part of why it's so toxic, right? Like most people, like my wife's like a Green Labour Party sort of voter. We talk about politics very, very rarely. Occasionally we do, but actually, you know what? People have more in common than they have in difference. People say, how can you be married to like the school teachery sort of sometimes green vote? I'm like, we talk about our kids. We have other things going on in our life. We're not losers who dominated by politics all the time. And therefore, when we do talk about politics, we can do so not hating each other. I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, you're calling me a loser here.
I'm saying we're all losers. If we weren't losers, we would be interested in things that were more fulfilling instead of things that were just frustrating. We're all losers.
I mean, I love. I'm
the number one loser.
No, I wouldn't say that. You've got a successful law practice, so you can't be that much of a loser. Mind you, then again, so's Greg Presland.
Yeah, that's right. I hope to be as much of a winner one day as Greg.
Oh dear. It's funny you talk about the green room because I've always viewed the green rooms in media, and it's a number of years since I've done that. In fact, it'd be more than basically since 2014. So what's that? 7 years? No more, 8 years. Yeah. So whenever I was in the green room, I used it as an opportunity to sledge very hard and very robustly those people, so that they got wound up like a clock spring. And then when you go on with them, they're still wound up. And then I adopt a patient and calm demeanor. And they look completely manic. And if you want to have a look at the results of something like that, go and have a look at it was on The Nation. It was in 2012. And I was on with Brian Edwards and Bill Ralston. Now, you go and have a look at that video, and you'll see my calm demeanor, and you'll see Brian Edwards losing it. And it's because I wound him up in the green room.
There's a very good old book about that. It's called Gamesmanship. And it was this guy who wrote it. It's like, it's hard to read because it's all old-timey language. It's not well written by today's standards, but it's all about the art of winning by not cheating, but doing the next thing next to cheating. And, in terms of how you get won over people psychologically. And, it's things like, if you're playing tennis with them and, they call the ball out, how to react in a way that will, just ruffle their feathers and make them feel like, they're being accused of cheating or being unfair, but without actually saying it, and how you just really put people off their game. It's called Gamesmanship. It's a great little book, and maybe I should use that more often. Maybe I'd come across better on TV if I was willing to play the game a bit more. Unfortunately, I'm a complete pussy too, so there we go. I'm one of the people who's completely nice to people on in the green room because I just can't stand the awkwardness of argument face to face. I've always been a writer rather than a talker.
It's coming from a lawyer, whose entire life really revolves around arguments.
Well, I'm a commercial, I'm a commercial lawyer, right? It's like I'm always about trying to get the deal done, right? And the way you get the deal done isn't by getting people's backs up. And it's about being constructive. It's about guarding your client's interests. But your client wouldn't come to you if they didn't want a deal to be done one way or the other. I always kind of think of the law I do as the sort of solution-oriented stuff. And, if it gets to the arguments floor, if we need arguments, then we give it to a barrister at that point. But, have you ever convinced anyone of a political point by getting their backs up and arguing with them and putting them in a position where they can't concede? I never have. I've always thought it's better to try and let them talk themselves into it by asking questions.
And that's the approach that I prefer now with politics. I've interviewed all sorts of people that I just do not agree with them in any way, shape or form, but just let them talk. And then we can, like Chris Trotter and I have very good discussions, even though we're pretty much implacably opposed to the solutions or the differing solutions that we have. But Chris and, even Matt McCartan, they're good people at heart, and they want the same results for New Zealand. They just have a different way of wanting to achieve those results. And, you'd know in business, as much as in politics, there's no right way to do anything. There's a way.
Oh, you're right.
There's a way to do something, right? Let's find some common ground. And this is the thing that I find so frustrating. We've nearly had 30 years of MMP, but we've still got this adversarial, we're right, you're wrong, or we won, you lost, eat that type mentality in politics. When everybody who voted for MMP had this motherhood and apple pie that they'll all work together now and be nice.
It's an interesting point that you raise about that, because I've often thought about it, which is, MMP was supposed to herald in, as you say, the sort of era of consensus-based politics, and it would be, you'd have more working across the aisle because you'd have a multiplicity of parties represented in Parliament. But while we got the electoral system, but we kept the FPP mentality. We had 100 plus years of FPP in our political culture, and you can't just graft, a new electoral system onto it when the culture is still the same. And so something that was really interesting to me, and I can't wonder if can't help but wonder if the dam's broken on it a little bit this election, is how, we still had this long-term trend where we had all these little parties sort of in the mid-90s, and they would all die out as Peter Dunn's career died out and all that sort of stuff. And there was this trend towards sort of back to a two-party system. And in this election, it's kind of exploded all that, right? You've got these minor parties winning electorate seats. And I just wonder if, we're finally we may be doing MMP as it was actually intended to be done, which I think is bad because I'm against MMP, but we might finally be, getting there as it was intended to be.
Yeah, I'm against MMP too, but we've had 2 referendums on this.
Yeah,
it isn't
not
going to
changing.
change, right? So anytime you put in a comment on a site or something about the electoral system, you'll always get somebody who says, "Oh, but we'd be better with STV." It's pointless even talking about it. We're not having it.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's similar to it's like fantasy politics, right? It's like talking about a UBI or a wealth tax. It's just it's a fun academic exercise, but politics is actually about the practicalities of getting stuff done, and that's always it's the criticism. There was a piece in the spin-off today about how there was a Green voter who was saying, "Oh, I've just realised now that voting for the Greens isn't going to actually get a wealth tax. It's not going to get these big things done." It's like, no, it never was. It's the politics is always the big parties. They make the decisions on the big things, and if a small party, you might get some concessions. And the trick for the small parties is to make those concessions as meaningful as possible. And that's why I'll be really interested to see what New Zealand First rings out of national this time round, because I think New Zealand First it's a really interesting position compared to where it's been in the past.
Well, let's just go back a little bit to 2017. And this is I'm interested in your perspective here as a National Party person, because in 2017, Bill English led the National Party. They came first, if you want to use, that analogy. They had the most votes. The Labour Party came second, and they were a long way short of where National was, but them and the Greens plus New Zealand First added up to more than what National had. And ACT was only 1 seat then. And so with the benefit of hindsight, we can now look back and then say, well, did Winston Peters do the right thing? Now, a lot of National Party people on my website would say Winston Peters betrayed the country because he didn't go with the National Party. And I always thought that was rather arrogant from a National supporter to expect that Winston Peters would go with them because they were the largest party. What are your views on that?
I think there was always a real cope, like that idea that the biggest party is owed the chance to form a government. It's never been something that's ever been talked about until the National Party started being the biggest party, right? You're right. That's the most unattractive part of the National Party coming out, which is the born to rule sort of thing. And so, as you say, Winston Peters was in a position where he could negotiate with both sides. a negotiation is pointless unless you're realistically going to go with either side. Like there's no real negotiating unless you've got a walk away position, right? And I just think the National Party screwed up the negotiations. Frankly, I think they had Stephen Joyce and Paula Bennett in the negotiation team. Winston Peters was suing Paula Bennett at the time, so it may not have been the dream team in terms of like who they chose to negotiate. And then from my understanding, and I don't know if this is true or not, it's just an understanding I have, is that they basically insulted the guy by offering him, all the baubles, thinking that's what he was all about. And that's such a fundamental misunderstanding of Winston Peters to think that he's just about that, because he is about that. The baubles are important, but like he believes in stuff, right? Like he's not a complete grifter. Like he's got beliefs. He wouldn't have had the political career he has had if he didn't fundamentally believe in stuff. I just think the National Party just read it wrong and they just insulted him. And I think, if there's any truth to the idea that they suggested he be the speaker this time around, same mistakes again. That inability
that is exactly what they were doing. And again, they're repeating the same mistakes. I mean, they were putting it about. I mean, it was hilarious. Where I live, a couple of floors above is a mate. He's a true blue nat. And just before the election, like the Thursday before the election, he was saying, it's terrible. We need to be voting for National because we need to have a government straight away because we need to get into it. We can't waste any time. And then over the weekend, or this was the week before, then over the weekend we had Chris Bishop come out and say pretty much exactly that. And then I knew that this was a talking point that had been pushed out into the electorates to the supporters, that we need to have an emphatic result so that we can get on with governing, because we can't waste any time. And I said to my mate, you're not aware of the statutory requirements. We've got to wait 20 days for the special votes. That's so anti-democratic what you're saying, that you're asking a government to be formed. I mean, unless it was so totally emphatic like Labor was at the end of, in 2020. The reality is, though, we've got this fractured electorate where Labor was really in it until the last 6 weeks, and then it just collapsed. But you had the arrogance of National thinking that they were going to get a two-party solution when we haven't had a two-party solution in like forever.
Yeah, apart from that time when we had a one-party solution. You're right. I mean,
and how did that all work?
Every other election's been hung.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. Every single, if the definition of a hung parliament is a parliament in which no one party or pre-agreed coalition of party sort of wins on election night. So we've had every single election bar the previous one has been a hung parliament. So you're right there. In terms of that strategy, in terms of saying you vote blue or get chaos or whatever. What I do know is I do know that was a deliberate strategy. I don't know how well it worked, but I for one piece of evidence that there was some thinking behind it. Pretty weak. But so my wife, she told me that she was probably going to vote for Labor, just 'cause she's a school teacher type. But she's one of those people who has sort of strong feelings about Winston and she's quite anti. And people have very polarized opinions about Winston, and she's one of them. So she came to me, she said, honey, do you think, I said, look, I'm thinking maybe I need to vote National, which would be the first time ever in her life, to make sure that it's not a Winston Peters hung parliament, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, of course, honey, you must vote yes, that's right. You should vote for National. That's the exact right thing to do. So I went away, came back the day after election, after being in Auckland for election day. And I said, how'd you vote, honey? She said, I didn't vote in the end. I didn't I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I had other things to do. And I didn't, I was that sort of depressed about it. And, I wasn't feeling great about it. So I just didn't vote. So I just wonder, whether or not, how, if that message was targeted at that sort of type of voter. I mean, it didn't work because we didn't get her to the polls to vote for blue, but it might have kept her from voting red. I don't know. We'll have to see how all that played out. I mean, there'll be a New Zealand election study that comes out, and it's going to be really interesting to see. But you're right. I think, it's always going to be the case this election that there was going to be. I mean, it's been obvious for about a year, right? There was going to have to be National Act in New Zealand first.
That's what I've been saying for a year, and all these National and Act people were going, no, it's going to be just National and Act. And, at the end of about October 2022, ACT was sitting at 15, 16, even up to 18% in some polls.
Yeah.
You have to say that David Seymour had an appalling campaign, really.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because everyone keeps talking about ACT as if they had this great campaign on the basis that they won Tamaki. They added one extra MP. It was they went from being the most disciplined overperformers of the parliament to completely dropping the ball in the campaign. Completely.
Yeah,
they lost so many votes.
Let's discuss that a little bit. I mean, let's just look at that, because you're absolutely right. They were overperforming. They were the opposition. National was playing, we're just like Labor, but less crap, right? That was their game. That's the game that worked in 2008 for John Key. John Key was advising Luxon right through this election campaign. They were making themselves a very, very small target. The pitch to the electorate was, we're like Labor, but less crap. And they actually forgot the next part of that, is that they're actually asking people to vote for crap.
Yeah.
Right. But ACT was the party that was performing. They had got the shooting community on board. They'd had a couple of MPs off the basis of that in the 2020 election. And they were polling in October 2022 at very high rates, and people were actually talking about them catching up to National. And then
you're right, and they made huge inroads into the rural farming sector. Out where I live, I went to so many visit with clients out on the farm, and so often, say, well, actually, you know what, I think we're going to vote for ACT this time around. It was like a real thing that as a National Party stalwart was sort of like worrying to me. I was like, is the farm vote being sort of shaken loose in the National Party because of the strong political performance of David Seymour? But then in the campaign, I think they did a couple of things. First of all, they just started to believe their own bullshit a bit too much about, and they got, like it was sort of just got over their skis a bit and got ahead of themselves. But the other thing, classic mistake, is picking a fight with Winston Peters. Why the hell would you do that? Why would you make your campaign as the leader of the ACT Party getting into a fight with Winston Peters, who is so much more of a talented politician than you, and you're bringing more and more attention, more and more contrast to Winston Peters, who's actually fundamentally quite a charismatic politician. And that billboard in Auckland, the ACT Party billboard featuring Winston Peters, saying "Don't get fooled again." For God's sakes, it could look like a New Zealand First.
Billboard. When I saw that, I thought, oh, that's awesome. That's a great billboard that Winston's put up. And then I phoned him. I said, "Oh, well done on the billboard." And he says, "It's not mine." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "It's the ACT Party's." And I said, "Well, it's got a quote that you could have said." I said, "You know what you should do is I said to him, you should just start saying, ACT's got some good advice there. Don't get fooled again. Vote for New Zealand First." So, it was bizarre.
Do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the referendum campaign in 2011 for MMP, to go back to that. And in fairness, I think a lot of us thought this was a good strategy at the time, which was to say, ditch MMP, don't make Winston the kingmaker, remove his kingmaker status by getting rid of MMP. And that was an election where Winston Peters was he came back into Parliament after being out of it. All it did was sort of draw attention to Winston Peters and his enduring relevance to New Zealand politics. In a campaign where Winston doesn't need to have 30% of the population like him. Winston only needs 5%. Between 5 and 10% is a great result. So the more and more attention you draw to Winston, the more and more you start fighting with him, the stronger you make him. And so what I wonder about ACT is ACT still a strong enough party as a party that it can look sort of introspectively at how its campaign went and it can learn those lessons? Or has it become so dominated by David Seymour and Brock Van Velden that, it's their party now? And so they'll just have the sycophants who say, "Look, you did great. It was amazing. You held up while National." Yeah. And if ACT is still a strong party, they'll take some serious lessons out of this campaign. But I'm an eternal pessimist. I doubt they will.
Look, I know a fair few people who are ACT supporters, and some who have actually been on the board of the ACT Party and have got nothing to do with the ACT Party now because of David Seymour and especially his behaviour during COVID, all of that sort of thing. But I don't think they have. What did he do? Well, he was suggesting that there were vaccination buses that would go door to door and drag people out of their homes and vaccinate them, Okay. His doctrinaire and arrogant behaviour towards the Wellington protests, all of that sort of stuff. And ACT people, in my experience, are generally very libertarian, very free thinkers.
Yes. Funnily enough.
And that's the thing. In 2022, David Seymour was running around the country holding free speech meetings. That's how they got the percentage up there. He was talking the talk, but when it came to walking the walk, he was decidedly crippled in his outlook. Yeah.
So to push my own barrow a little bit on it too, like I think something that happened was like he's I'm one of the minority New Zealanders who's a churchgoer, right? I go to mass Catholic, I go to mass every week. And, it's an important part of my life, even though I make lots of mistakes and I sin constantly, but it's still something that's important to me. And a lot of those people, obviously, people of my tribe, thinking National's not really that, strong of a supporter of our liberties and all that.
Yep.
And I think there was a lot of people who vote, who sort of in that way inclined who supported ACT, but Seymour was so arrogant about Christians and antagonistic towards them. And he went and did an interview with Bob McCroskey. And what do you think about Bob?
Oh, that was an appalling interview.
I know. And then, I tell you something. Do you know who's not going to insult religion, Christianity? Winston Peters.
No.
It's just, Winston Peters is not that dumb. I don't know what Winston's religion is. Probably nothing. But he's respectful enough.
He has faith. I've had discussions with him about that.
Well, he's respectful enough, right? And which Seymour just doesn't respectful.
I mean, Bob McCroskey is the most inoffensive person you can meet. I mean, he's congenial. He's jovial. He talks about some serious things, but the way David Seymour acted in that interview was just appalling. As a person of faith, I really struggle with politicians in general, and especially politicians who profess a faith but are involved in politics. And Christopher Luxon's one of those, where he's says he's a Christian, but when he's questioned on it, he's very squishy indeed. And I don't know how you can exist in politics and have a Christian outlook on life, because politics by necessity involves lying and deception and dissembling and all these things, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think it's exactly true, and it's one reason. It's one reason out of many why I probably never wanted to go into politics myself, despite thinking it would be quite fun in a lot of ways. You just have to make too many compromises, right? Like the way to get power is to compromise way all the way through, and to the point where you're doing things that you say that you're diametrically opposed to because it's the expedient thing to do. I don't like politicians talking about their religion for that exact same reason. I'd rather not know about it. But the thing is with Bob McCroskey is he's got thousands of followers, right? Like he does. There's networks of thousands of people, and the ACT Party just doesn't have the margin to annoy people like that when they've got Winston Peters as an alternative. Yeah,
well, that's exactly right. And you're right too about politicians have to compromise all the time. That's why I'm never going to be a politician, because I've got principles I will not compromise on. And part of the rehabilitation of me and what I do around politics is that I've put faith at the centre of everything in my life, and so I won't compromise on that.
Yeah,
it's something that's important, and you can't, you just can't be involved in politics and have faith at the centre of your life.
You know what? A lot of people, I think, would have a lot of scorn for you saying that you're putting faith at the centre of your life. What I always say to people, though, is, religion isn't like a club for people who are really good. It's a field hospital for those of us who need to work on our lives constantly. Like it's for us, people like you and me, we need it because we need healing. Like we're not great people. We make mistakes. We've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes in our life. That's the reason to have faith, not because of, because you're some pure and good person. And that's the reason why I don't like politicians talking about it, because they're never talking about it in terms of their own need for salvation or healing or to be fixed in some way. They always use it as as an example of why they are good people, what's good about them, not what's bad about them. Well, so they should just not talk about it.
Exactly. And, people forget, though, Jesus himself said that he without sin cast the first stone. And he was he was there in the crowd, and he didn't pick a stone up either.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, and that's the thing, the church I go to every Saturday, we've got a big sign up, it's in Papatoe. It's got a big sign up and it says, "Come as you are."
A Seventh-day Adventist.
Yep, Seventh-day Adventist, yep.
Yep.
So, come as you are, and there's all types that come there, gang members wearing patches and stuff like that.
It's a field hospital. It's a field hospital for sinners.
We're all sinners. But that's the other thing too, that I find a lot of people don't understand what the word sin is. I mean, for a start, the word sin in English didn't exist before about 900 AD. Right, is that right? It's a Proto-Germanic word.
Okay.
The original Greek from the Bible and translations means to miss the mark. Right.
Yes.
And so for me, this will be hard for you as a Catholic, right?
Go for it. Right. A lot of things are hard for me as a Catholic.
but I look at it in a shooting analogy, right? So if I go out to the gun club and I'm shooting trench. There's 25 targets, and I do it, and I shoot 20 out of 25. Do I now pack up and go, I'm not very good at this, I'll quit now? I missed the mark on 5 of those targets. Or if you're shooting, at a target down range somewhere, and you get, out of 100, you might get 95. Do you now pack up your rifle and go, I'm not going to do any more of that? Or do you keep practicing and try and hit the mark more?
Yeah, that's a terrific analogy. Yeah, I might just steal that one at some point.
Yeah. So that's what I do. I have these discussions all the time with friends and people, and they're going, but you say you're a Christian, but you do this and you do that. Yeah. And I said, I missed the mark. But, I'm trying to minimize that.
Imagine how bad I would be if I wasn't a Christian. That's what I say to people. You can really see some bad stuff then.
And for years, I was a token Christian. I'd say I was a Christian. I changed all of that in the last couple of years.
And good for you, mate.
I tell you what focuses your mind, nearly dying.
Yeah.
Well, I came within a gnat's whisker of dying, and you sit there and take stock. And I decided to make some changes. It took me 5 years to make those changes.
Yep.
But, I think I'm in a better place now because of that.
Well, you certainly seem very philosophical now, and good on you. But we're all a work in progress, right? It's just that, unfortunately for you, Cameron, is that, you're a work in progress in public. And, if the mistakes I make in life, that, they're private. People aren't jumping all over me. I mean, one day I'll make a really bad mistake, and then I've got enough enemies at this point that they'll really go for me in public. But, it must be an additional burden just knowing that, because of your political blogging, you've just got people who are willing to pounce on everything every misstep you make. I guess the big thing is I hope you just don't care about them anymore, or don't care about what those people think.
No, I don't care about them. I get every time I say something on X, you'll get somebody who says, "Oh, you're irrelevant," or almost everything you say is wrong. And then my response to them now, I mean, before I would have attacked them or ridiculed them.
Yeah.
Now I either ignore them or I just say, "And yet here you are."
Yeah. Great. Shall we talk about the election a bit more?
Yeah. Now you've written a memo to Christopher Luxon on your Substack, The Blue Review. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think fundamentally this election, Labor lost the election because people, have just lost faith in Labor's ability to deliver things that matter, right? Like, we talk endlessly about, this, the debate meant this and the debate meant that, or look at this, misstep that happened. But, people can't afford to fill up their cars with petrol, like it's, the pain at the pump, the pain at the grocery till matters so much more. The fear of going to the hospital ED waiting room matters so much more than anything else. So the first mandate that Luxon's got, I think, is that he just has to somehow, and I'm not hopeful even really that he can do it, but they've got to concentrate on fixing those, but getting the basics right. Now, you might say, and plenty of people on the right will say, well, you're just promising to manage stuff better that already exists. And it's like, yeah, actually, that's the first thing, right? First prove that you can be competent, and then people might trust you to implement, more changes. But you've got to, if National can't get on top of the cost of living crisis and broken public services, they're going to look like a one-term government very, very fast. There'll be lots of people who are going to be, you know how it is. A new government coming into place. There are jobs up for grabs for people on the right, and there'd be a whole lot of people putting their hands up, wanting jobs, flooding in. People who've been fair weather friends in the past, not principled enemies, but, sort of fair weather friends. They'll be coming in trying to sell the National Party on, doing this or that, or having some sort of vision about this. But I just think Luxon, the testing of him in the next 12 months, he's going to have to work with Seymour and Peters and prioritise actually just making those broken things work better. If he can do that, he'll get a big second re-election, and that's the time that you might try to implement some serious reforms. Yeah, but don't run before you can walk.
Yeah, Matt McCartan is the one who taught me an analogy that New Zealand politics is a game of two halves. We have a 3-year electoral cycle. But every 3 years is a half of a game. So you get elected, the voters watch you in the first half of the game, the first 3 years. If they think you're doing okay, then you get to play the second half, and you get another 3 years. And if you've done okay in that, then they might let you play another game. But under MMP, we've never had a 4-term government. The last 4-term government we had was Keith Holyoake's, which is decades ago. So the reality is you get to play a game and a half if you're partially competent. If you're dreadfully incompetent, you get to play either a half game or you get a full game, and then you don't get another one.
That's a good analogy. The way I often think about it is I've often thought about politics as being similar to a commercial lease. You got 3
5 plus 5 plus 5,
or 3 by 3 by 3. And so you get 3 by 3 by 3. So you get to renew it those three times, but you're not allowed to exercise the right of renewal unless you're not in breach, right? So if you're in breach as a tenant, then the landlord can refuse, to let you renew the lease, and that's kind of how it is, right?
It's a good analogy too.
Yeah, there's another depressing commercial lease analogy. Cam, which is the ratchet clause, and the ratchet clause is the clause that says the rent can go one way, it can be increased on a rent review, but it can never be decreased. It operates like a ratchet, and unfortunately, and for us, the ratchet effect in terms of commercial leases, in terms of politics, is government programs, government spending. It can go one way, and then to get in, you've got to promise to continue it. You've got to swallow the dead rat of working for families, and that's where the pessimism comes in, I guess. But my view and my advice to National is: listen, you've got to get some runs on the board quickly on making things work, because this country just feels so broken. We were talking before about how you had to go to the ED, and you somehow got in within 10 minutes. But I was
lucky, I think.
Yeah, well, it must be, because I've had to take my kids to the ED a couple of times in the last year, and just, the fear of going and having to wait with your kids in what's like purgatory. Sorry to use a Catholic idea, but the purgatory of the waiting room, sitting there with all the drunks, who are vomiting their guts out, and you have to wait 5-6 hours, and you get to that 3-hour point, and you're thinking, is it fine? Do I just go home and come back, go to the GP? I've waited for 3 hours. What if they're going to call me in the next half an hour? that is the type of stuff I think that just makes New Zealanders in such a depressed mood at the moment. And I don't know how he's going to do it, but man, Peters, Seymour, and Luxon have got to get some runs on the board on that type of stuff.
I mean, there are some huge things. If we look at what Labor promised, they promised the earth in 2017 and did it again in 2020. And they delivered the leavings of a pothole, basically, in terms of achievement. And I'm not sure that they're going to be trusted for a long time, but that will only be true if what you say is correct, that National gets the basics. I mean, we've gone from government spending of around $60 billion per annum to $160 billion.
Yeah, I know.
And we've got no discernible increase in services or anything else. And it seems the only metric that the Labor government had was that we'll spend more money than you can imagine.
It's incredible when you think about it. It's kind of like there's this New Zealand disease, the New Zealand disease where you can everything costs more now. You get less of it. Everything is over budget, behind schedule, and there's just like nothing in this country works. That's how it feels. I don't know if that's the mood elsewhere in the Western world, but man, like it didn't feel that way when I was a kid. It just didn't feel that way then.
Well, I'll give you a more personal analogy. I was born in Fiji, right? Yeah. And periodically I go back there and 5 years ago, I spent a considerable amount of time there in 2018, came back and had a stroke. And then that's why I haven't been back since. But in Fiji, doing simple things is almost impossible. Like going to get a driver's license, right? You basically have to set aside at least a day to go and get into the queue. You have to queue to get into the queue. Yeah. And then you get given a number and then you queue again to be called, and you think you've got everything right, and then some guy sits there with a clipboard and a pen, and you get down the page and something's missing. And instead of trying to solve it right then, and then he goes, oh, no, you haven't got this, denied. And then you've got another day to do that. If you want to go to the bank, if you're an ordinary citizen in Fiji, you want to go to the bank, there's queues out the door and around the corner. Now, this is the tragic thing about it, right, in Fiji. If you're a European and you go to the bank, they come out and pull you out of the queue and deal with you separately, which is appalling. But that's how they operate, right? And everything in Fiji grinds to a halt because of the bureaucracy. And I've been seeing over the last 5-6 years in New Zealand exactly the same thing happening with this overabundance of bureaucracy and bureaucratic procedures and policy, and it's grinding everything to a halt. But it started 30 years ago. It started when Simon Upton brought in the Resource Management Act, the single worst piece of legislation ever to be foisted on the New Zealand population. And no one will do anything about it.
So that's a classic example of a guy who's really clever, with all the right intentions. Yep. Give me a dummy who understands his limitations any day, I think, over a smart ass, The Fiji thing you said is really interesting for two reasons. One quite personal, sheds a bit of light on something personal for me. I took my kids on a cheap Fiji holiday when I had 3 kids, and it was I don't mind telling you this, it was a time in my life and I was under a lot of stress, and I've sort of had a very bad anxiety disorder, which I had refused to do anything about, to get it diagnosed.
Typical Kiwi bloke.
And I had I just thought, I just have to get through one more day, it'll be fine. And I had this horrible panic attack, when I got to Fiji at the resort. And I was convinced I was having a heart attack, which
it's awful. I know what you mean. Yeah,
it was like this most excruciating pain. But anyway, the doctor in Fiji, he was really in the resort. He was really nice. He said, "Oh yes, I've been to Palmerston North. That's a nice, quaint little place." I was like, "Well, okay." But he said, "Listen, you have to go to the to a medical center because nothing I'm going to tell you is going to convince you that you're not having a heart attack. You have to have an ECG. So I went there and they basically saw me straight away. They dusted off this, ancient machine like it was from the 1850s or whatever, and they gave me an ECG and they gave me a bill, and I went up and paid the bill, and all said and done, it was probably about 90 minutes. Had the reassurance that I wasn't having a heart attack, and it hadn't occurred to me till now, that for whatever reason, like it would probably take, I probably got the first class service there, right? Like that was, if I was a Fijian, they would have told me to go home, right? Is that probably how it would have been?
It breaks my heart every time I go back to Fiji. And I don't usually go to the resorts, right? I was born in Suva. Yeah. It feels like home when I get off the plane at the airport. I get in the cab to take me to the hotel, and the guy says, "Oh, where are you from?" They always want to know where you're from, and I always say, "Right here." Oh, yeah. You're a Kaiviti, yes. And then they know to take me directly to where I'm going because they know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. But it breaks my heart when you see, the house that we lived in was in Suva Point. It's some of the most expensive real estate in Suva. Houses there are over $1 million Fijian. And yet 200 meters from there is the largest squatter settlement in Suva. Yeah. And there are people living cheek by jowl, literally in ramshackle huts. But you also look at that and you see these kids coming out of there, going to school, and their shirts are immaculate and white, and they've got this beaming smile and this pride of going to school. And I sit there and I think, Kiwis don't realise how well off we actually are. Yeah,
I know. I couldn't agree more. And I had conflicted feelings about the whole thing. Because, I'm a bit of a cheapskate. And so, it was something I promised the family we'd do, but I got the cheapest possible resort, right? So we got to the Nandi airport, we got into the exchange and the transfer. And, like a whole lot of families and the resorts were nicer. It was not nice to begin with, and they got more and more dilapidated as we got on. And the kids were like, "Is this one ours?" I was like, "No, way too nice. Just wait." So it was fine. It was a comfortable sort of 70s era, quite family friendly one. But it was the first time I'd been overseas in a long time. First time I'd been to Fiji, and the people were just so lovely and polite and it was the place was full of Australians. Loud, obnoxious Australians. But we went for a walk along the coastline, the beach, and right next to the resort, right next to it was where the village where all the people who worked there lived, and it was like from one thing to the next. It was like comfortable, not luxury because it was an older resort, but Western comfort right next to this grinding poverty, and yet the people who who worked in the resort, they were lovely to our kids. They were lovely to us. They were lovely to the boorish, rude Australians who would just, beckon to them and things like that. And it really jarred with me as a Kiwi because I guess as New Zealanders, we pride ourselves on sort of not having that sort of class awareness. But at the same time, presumably they were quite good jobs that people wanted and they wouldn't have otherwise. So I just felt conflicted about the whole thing. But one thing you're really right about is that those communities, they really do pride and take a lot of pride, and they take a lot of what's the word? The word is gratitude in terms of the educational opportunities that are available to them when they are available. And we just take this for granted here. We are living off the capital of we've the hard work of previous generations.
Well, we've got a situation where more kids are not attending school than are attending school in some areas.
Yeah.
And you look at the kids in Fiji and they're desperate to go to school and learn, and they see education as a way out of the mire that they're in. And, this is, you touched on why Labor lost, and it wasn't just the lack of delivery. And it's exactly the same reason why Helen Clark lost in 2008. where they've talked a big game about lifting people out of poverty. Chris Hipkins in the debate said, we've done this, we've lifted 80,000, whatever number, some fanciful number based on statistics, lifted out of poverty. But I would bet you that not a single Labour politician, or indeed any other politician in our parliament, ever bothered to identify just one of those kids, right? And go and ask them, how do you think, you've been lifted out of poverty now, how do you feel? Because they'll say, well, we haven't moved, we're in the same house, in the same street, with the same crime, going to the same rubbish schools, nothing's changed. And it's been like that.
Do you remember, there was a blog post you wrote, it was a long time ago, it'd probably be like in 2014 or 2013. It just comes to mind. It was about, there was someone who had, like, there was, they'd gone to the media and they'd complained about the national government. And the local MP was Jacinda Ardern, or she was the list MP who was, standing locally or whatever. Yeah. And they'd gone to the MP, Labour MP, to Jacinda, and Jacinda had said something like, "Oh, we can put you in touch with the media." Like, that was the help that they had offered to give them. And then the person followed up with you about how disappointing it was. Do you remember that?
It was a lady who actually lived in out near Pukekohe, if I remember rightly. Yeah. And I did follow up with her. I went to her house and I saw how she lived, and I spent some time with her. And she was gobsmacked that I was the only journalist who had bothered to do anything like that.
See her as a person.
And it's funny you say that. I thought the other day I must look that person up again and see how they're getting on.
Yeah, because they're a person, because they're a real person. They're not just a statistic or a story or an illustration. I think you're right on that. The other thing that's interesting though is, and you talk about, the bureaucracy and how hard it is to get things done, is I think we take for granted that's always going to be, New Zealand's always going to be a first world country. And what I was thinking about, we're a second world at the moment. But, it's so interesting how Argentina, before the Second World War, Argentina was more prosperous per capita than the United States. It was on the way to being an economic superpower. It was a really strong agricultural country like New Zealand, and look at Argentina now, right? Like it can happen, and it can happen here.
Venezuela, right? They've got oil, they've got abundant resources, and yet they're living in grinding poverty, all because of a lack of leadership.
Yeah, depressing.
So your memo to Christopher Luxon, that struck a chord. That's why I called you up and said, "Hey, let's talk about this." I worry too that National will be ground down by the bureaucracy, by the intransigence of the civil servants who have their own agenda in there. That's the thing. You can change the government, but you never change the civil service.
It's a blob, right? It's like fighting against the blob. The more you punch it, the more you get sucked into it, and the tireder you get. And that's why I'm a pessimist, right? Like, I think Damien Grant was having me on about how, not being ambitious enough in terms of the education sector, something we've talked about today. But education reforms have to be implemented by school principals and school boards, teachers
and unions.
And in 3 years, you can pass the law in 3 years. You're not going to get the time to do that, and you're not going to
fight
be able
you every
to force
step of the way.
Every step of the way, and you'll give up.
You look at charter schools, right?
Yeah.
The charter schools that were implemented did amazing things, and then the government changed and they were gone in a heartbeat.
Yeah, because they only built 12 of them, They didn't build it. They didn't make them too big to fail. That's the problem, right? And so
that's the one thing that Labour are very, very good at doing, right? They put things in place knowing that the National Party, because they're a party of the status quo, will invariably just adopt it. And you raised earlier, working for families. Yeah. And that was brought in. John Key was the leader of the National Party. He said it was communism by stealth and we'd repeal it. And when he got into power, he didn't repeal it. In fact, he extended it.
So that's the ratchet effect. Yeah. It can move one way. Unless, and this is I don't want us to have this, but unless you have a giant crash. And, we had a giant crash in the early 80s. And that gives you the leeway to fix things, but you need that crisis before you have a paradigm shift. I mean, you things that can't if they can't go on forever, it won't go on forever. But the crash is going to be, the correction is going to be really, really hard.
It's going to be hurtful.
And we're going to have it,
It has to happen.
Education's a huge, like we used to be world leaders in reading and maths, and it's just, if you don't teach your own kids reading and maths now, there's just no guarantee they're going to be literate or numerate. We have gone backwards so much on that.
Well, that's the problem is that too many people in New Zealand now, and we saw this as a result of the COVID stuff, and it's really accelerated now. Too many people in New Zealand expect that the solutions for anything, whether it's their education of their children or the health of their children or anything else, are completely reliant on the government and are aghast when there isn't someone from the government saying, hi, I'm from the government. Ronald Reagan said the 9 most dreaded words in the English language are, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you.
Yeah. But we've that's our culture now. We've taught ourselves to be helpless like that, right? And it's a hard thing to unlearn.
I mean, we had constant, 3 or so years, constant advertisements on television and politicians saying that these communities were vulnerable.
Yeah.
If you tell someone they're vulnerable for long enough, guess what? They'll become vulnerable.
Yeah. Give a dog a bad name, right? There's no difference.
Yeah. It's dogs aren't bad, their owners are.
Yeah. That's very, very true.
So just a quick summary then to wrap up, because we've been talking for an hour or so, right?
Yeah.
You've got a little bit of hope, but there's a sense of disappointment there with you on what you think might happen over the next 3 years.
I'm a pessimist, right? For all the reasons we've talked about. I've sort of been taking the view for a while now that forces and trends matter more than individual politicians. You need to have the right politician in place, but it's the broader economic and social trends are going to lead to a certain place, and when we get to the point that that's no longer sustainable, then we'll see the change. And if I'm being honest with you, I think that the best that can be hoped for the short term is not to make things worse, right? For a national party that will run things properly, that won't go out of its way to bring in new big spending programs or new social interventions, and just going to leave the rest up to the media, to the culture, to the communities to create the demand for the actual change.
Yeah.
If the knock on the National Party is that it runs communism better, I hope for a better run communist state. But one thing I can tell you is that if they don't deliver that, then we'll get the badly run version again, and it'll come sooner than you think.
And then the minor parties will grow even more powerful.
They will. And, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, but I'm still enough of a true blue dairy farmer's son that, I have hope for the National Party, but I don't expect much.
Well, on that note, Liam here, thank you for coming on The Crunch and sharing your thoughts from a National Party perspective.
My absolute pleasure, and I'm sorry it was so rambling, but feel free to call me back anytime you want.
No problems. Thanks a lot. Well, who knew a discussion about politics would get a little sidetracked with a discussion about faith and the journey we end up on as we discover our faith. But there you go. Faith can and does drive some of us to try and be better humans, even in politics. Tell me your thoughts on what Liam had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now. This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Gary Moller is a nutritionist and an endurance athlete. During the COVID debacle, he popped his head above the parapet and has been lobbying against the therapeutics bill. We discuss an article he wrote for the BFD where he swapped his support from ACT to New Zealand First, and do a bit of a deep dive on that, where things are heading now after the election, and discuss the lost opportunities for the freedom movement after the election. He joins me now. Welcome to The Crunch.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're most welcome. Now, you wrote an article for us before the election on the BFD, and you've talked about that with Paul Brennan, but I think for this discussion, it might be a good idea to do a bit of just to revise what you said back then and then talk about if anything's changed in your point of view since the election that resonates with that article that you wrote for us back then.
Well, I guess the question is, where do we start, Cam? Because there are so many things to cover and so many twists and turns. And in addition to that, I've spent the last week or so having a post-election detox. So, yes, the original goal was that for the so-called freedom movement and people who were felt they were disenfranchised, not represented by the existing political parties, we needed to get representation in Parliament. And to do so, we had to get either MPs into the electorates or else have sufficient party vote to get past 5%. And so those became the criteria, the minimum.
Yes.
We needed to get past those thresholds. And we saw from the Tauranga and Hamilton by-elections and also the Australian state and federal elections that the greatest danger for us was the splitting of the vote. The proliferation of minor parties, all with admirable objectives, wonderful policies, great leaders, but in the end, the 1%ers.
Yeah.
And no electorates. So we had to unite the parties. And one of the tactics that I implemented very early on was to, instead of recreating the wheel, is to look at a existing political party that best reflected the so-called freedom movement.
Yeah.
And adopt it.
Yeah, that's a strategy I've talked about often, that people who are invested in a particular outcome and are very passionate about that. And a case in point is the Libertarian Party, if you remember back in the day.
Sure.
You know, Lindsay Perigo was involved with that. A number of other people that I respect who have been involved in that. But ultimately, they were a bunch of very energetic, politically aware people, enthusiastic, but were largely on the outside of the tent shouting to be let in and were never let in. And I had suggested to them back in the day that they should take their enthusiasm and infect other parties with that enthusiasm, and by using political osmosis, inoculate the political parties that they then join and become with their particular brand of libertarianism and freedom. And I saw that as being, you know, in this last election, another valid way of doing that. Now, you had dabbled with trying to do that with the ACT Party, didn't you?
Yes. Well, first of all, just what you were describing there, the socialists or communists infiltrating and taking over the Green Party, my Green Party, is a very good example of where an existing political party with all of its established infrastructure and that was simply taken over.
Yeah.
And we no longer have a Green Party, do we? We have an a la New Zealand Communist Party.
Yeah, it's a Marxist Maoist party with a green tinge in reality. You know, literally, you know, they're described as watermelons, green on the outside and deeply red on the inside. And that is true about the Green Party.
Absolutely. And I was very involved in the Green movement and am now deeply disappointed and disillusioned. But that aside, when I looked at the ACT Party, I looked closely at their constitution, and it was as if it had been custom written 20 years ago with today in mind, with our needs in mind. It was the perfect party.
Yeah.
So quietly, I rallied my friends, supporters, and we all started joining the ACT Party. And we started that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I made sure that David Seymour was familiar. I copied him in on some of my correspondence and so on, because I didn't want to be doing anything underhand.
Yeah.
honesty, integrity. Those are very important.
Big pluses,
qualities.
but also a handicap in politics, if I just quietly add.
yeah, well, you're right, and we've seen plenty of that just over this election. We saw plenty of that.
Just take Jacinda Ardern. Remember, she stood there before the 2017 election and told us that she'd never told a lie, and believed that politicians could have a career in politics without lying. And at the time she did that, I said, well, that was the first lie right there, that she had never told a lie.
That's right. Yes, it certainly was many of those examples, they're certainly real reality checks as to what we have to deal with. But Cameron, I'll do my best, my utmost to maintain my own integrity and honesty, and not stoop to underhand tactics.
Yeah.
So we sought to basically join the ACT Party, get involved, and change the culture of it to better reflect, what you would call libertarian values, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Yes, that's right. And the perfect party for Lindsay Perigo.
It's funny, because
Yes.
David Seymour talks a huge game on freedom of speech.
Yeah.
But when a whole lot of Kiwis tipped up at Parliament to exercise their freedom of speech, he wouldn't talk to them.
Yes, that was very disappointing. But I didn't see that as an impediment to start with. So we did what we did. We joined the party. The numbers were increasing. It was proceeding very nicely. And then things changed. They changed.
Is there a time frame for that? So you think it was early this year, not late last year?
Early this year, things changed for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but over the previous, since the first lockdowns, the idea of joining an existing party, becoming it, and it becoming us was the strategy. And I was going quietly, and in addition to that, testing the model, and began creating a website to launch it as a national program.
Yeah.
And then the Therapeutic Products Act, legislation was introduced.
Yep.
And I took a read of it and went, holy shit, this is terrible. We'd already fought it. We'd been fighting it since 2007. I'm talking about the natural health industry.
Yes.
And on each occasion that the government of the day tried to introduce it, Winston Peters basically had it thrown out.
Yep.
And at the same time, it became obvious that Winston Peters was back in the political game.
Yeah.
So we had those two things coming together, Winston Peters and the Therapeutic Products Bill. And as a matter of honour, we had to go with Winston.
Right, that's a significant change to go from ACT to New Zealand First.
Well, yes, but you see, Winston had saved my bacon, my business, my friends. The whole, if we are to practice natural body heal thyself medicine in New Zealand, if it is to have any chance of survival, it won't with the therapeutic products legislation. It's a death sentence for any doctor, nutritionist, naturopath, herbalist, or anybody else who wants to practice holistic medicine or healing, might be the better word. The therapeutic products legislation was going to threaten to put all of us out of business and give the citizens of New Zealand only one choice, and that is allopathic medicine and basically patent medicines, patent remedies, and nothing else. So
is this bill Big Pharma fighting back or taking control, even more control?
Oh, I think it's I've referred to the idea of klepto-globalists.
Yeah.
And it's basically kleptomaniacs who basically have got themselves in a position where they want to own absolutely everything, including humanity, our bodies and souls.
Right.
That's the way I see it. And they won't stop unless we push back firmly.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I've talked to a couple of people in this industry that one of them's now got out of the industry because he could see where it was going, and he was selling supplements and pretty good supplements too. I've used them myself, and I found them very beneficial. But people, they're having their livelihoods destroyed to control things that are actually not harmful. And I find it incredible that we've got a bill or an act in Parliament in place now that seeks to control things that are beneficial to people, not harming people.
Well, I've been trying to find the paper that was published about 15, 20 years ago. The coroner in Christchurch took a look at his records over the last 50 years for deaths from taking natural supplements like vitamins. And he found one death, and it was sadly a child that choked to death on a vitamin pill that his mother had given him. Right. Now, in 50 years, that was the only documented death that could be attributed to a vitamin supplement. Now, the fact is that vitamins and minerals, when dispensed responsibly by people like myself, they're incredibly safe. And if they are to be regulated, they need to have their separate legislation that reflects the degree of risk. You can't lump a vitamin such as a vitamin C pill alongside a potent pharmaceutical drug. And they have completely different risk profiles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to separate it out. It needs to be there needs to be the legislation for drugs, big medicine, big surgery, that kind of thing, and then there needs to be legislation that covers natural health supplements. And by the way, the Fair Trading Act covers it. It's fine. You don't need any more. If we make a misrepresentation, then go and complain for false advertising, and that'll sort it out. That's what happens now. It works fine.
Yeah. I mean, my experience is that there's a happy medium, isn't there, between therapeutics, treatments, vitamins, those sorts of things, healthy eating. I mean, but that can only go so far. I mean, there's some significant issues with healthy eating in New Zealand anyway, because our soils don't contain certain elements within our soils. And so we've had to add things to foodstuffs. Classic cases, iodine being added to salt, right? Or folate being added to bread. Those sorts of things. There are significant deficiencies within our soils, and therefore the foods that we grow or the meats or fishes that we eat don't have those nutrients in them because they're just not in the environment that we are existing in. So we need to add to that.
Yeah, you're quite right. So, for example, New Zealand is extremely deficient in selenium. And in fact, the further south you go, the greater the deficiency. Down in the deep south, there used to be a problem with what was called white muscle disease in sheep and cattle. Yeah. The animals would miscarry, or when they were born, they would live for a few days and die from heart failure. And I always say to people, look, if you really want to learn about nutrition, go and consult a rural vet.
Yeah.
Okay. They really probably know more than a trained human nutritionist for human health. So it's an interesting subject, and I should also point out that most of the food we eat nowadays is nutrient depleted. You have to look at what's put on the soil, and that includes all the imported food. Now, it's mostly grown through industrial purposes, where the nutrients that are put on the soil are the ones that make the plants grow best, but that's not necessarily what makes human beings grow the best.
Yeah. No, I understand completely. Having gone through
digressed.
that. Well, no, because it's important, because it's telling listeners how you got to the point of wanting to make sure that there were politicians that were aware of the bigger picture on a lot of these things, and you came to the conclusion through your own personal experience that Winston Peters had a better grasp on the impacts of potential legislation than organisations like the National Party or indeed the ACT Party.
Well, more than that, Cam, it seemed like come hell or high water, all of the incumbent politicians were going to ram this legislation through. And that turned out to be the case. Despite the thousands of objections, I think it was at least 90% of the submissions were against it. And many of them were very well reasoned as well. They were serious concerns. But after the submissions had been heard, it was only a matter of weeks before they published their conclusions, and the legislation went through.
So you're experiencing disbelief, I guess, that this process happened like that. I'm far more cynical. I've been involved in politics for a long time, and I have to educate people in other particular areas of interest that I share, especially around firearms. Everyone was saying, submit on this bill. And I said, well, there's no point submitting. And they'd say to me, well, why? And I said, because they've already predetermined the outcome. And what they're doing is giving you the illusion of consultation. And so you're actually playing their game, and you're playing in the system. And then what they'll do is they'll take all of that consultation, they'll produce a pre-written summary that will say, well, thank you all very much for those opinions, but we're going to do this anyway because we think we know better than you. And that's the problem, isn't it, with politicians? They think they know better than us.
Well, yeah, and it even begs the question of somebody else pulling the strings. Who are they working for? Are they working for the best interests of New Zealand citizens, or are they working for the best interests of some other party? Okay. It does beg that question. And look, Cam, I didn't come down with the last shower either. And I saw the whole select committee process as being a sham. Yeah. And I put in the briefest of interviews, the briefest of submissions myself. Yeah. But decided, well, if we are not in the game, we can't complain. So we put in our submissions, and we knew that it was going to be just, brushed over, and they were going to push it through. They were determined to push it through. We knew they were. Our only hope right from the very beginning, before we put in any submissions at all, is we knew we had to get somebody into political power who could then basically on our behalf throw that legislation out and replace it with something that was more suitable, or in fact just leave it as it is. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
that's the problem, isn't it? Politicians like to tinker and improve things, and they very often cause unintended consequences.
Well, the unintended consequences is that we have an increasingly unhealthy nation, and it's going to become even more unhealthy because they are now giving us the only option, and that is to repeat what has failed us miserably since the 1970s, which is basically a complete and utter reliance on patent medicines. Okay, this is goes against this whole idea of our bodies being genetically programmed to move towards a state of perfect health. And all we have to do as health professionals is nurture that, to take a loving Mother Nature approach to health, rather than coming in with the let's smash and bro, okay? Come in with the big hit, the B-52 napalm bombing raid, where you have the treatment was a success, however, the patient died, okay? That approach just does not work. We need to nurture, we need to cuddle, we need to use all of those nice, gentle terms. Food be thy medicine. There are all these sorts of concepts which go absolutely against the big pharma approach.
But it can take a different approach. I mean, I'll give you an example from my life, right? So 5 years ago, pretty much, on this weekend coming up will be 5 years since I had a rather severe stroke.
Yeah.
After the first 24 hours when it was really touch and go whether I was going to live or not, I started to think about how I was going to recover from this significant health event. I had to do the obvious things, remove stress, do a whole lot of things like that, restructure my life around all of that. But I started researching what causes strokes and what helps prevent strokes. And I came to, within 2 days or so, I was following up on these threads and looking at peer-reviewed studies, in reputable scientific papers and organizations that led me to the conclusion, and I haven't been disabused of this notion by anybody yet, that nicotine was the way that I could jumpstart fixing the neuroplasticity in my brain. And that nicotine and nicotine alone, and there's significant studies on this out of the FDA in the United States and other places around the world, that nicotine significantly aids in and is beneficial to developing neuroplasticity, and that strokes are caused by a lack of neuroplasticity, and that then causes a blood vessel to shatter or break, which is in your brain, which is essentially what a stroke is. And I was sitting there thinking, and so I said to the doctor, well, can I get some nicotine patches? Well, you're not a smoker. Well, do I have to start to get nicotine patches then? No. I said, I want nicotine patches. Why? I said, well, I need to get nicotine into my body. No, you can't do that. And everywhere I went was no, no, no in that first 2 weeks. And look, I don't like smoking cigarettes. They're horrible things. They're awful. They've got all sorts of other, additives and things like that in there. And I very quickly came to the conclusion that I should either start smoking a pipe or cigars, because the only ingredients in pipe tobacco and cigars is tobacco, nothing else. And then I worked out that smoking one cigar a day, I found a study by the FDA in the United States that said 1 to 2 cigars a day has negligible negative health effects on you. A longitudinal study. But smoking one cigar gives you the equivalent of nicotine of one packet of cigarettes. So here I am, a week after having a stroke, trying to find ways to get nicotine into my body to help with neuroplasticity, being stopped by the very medical people who ignore these reports that are out there. And so I started smoking cigars, one a day. And people, my doctor said, well, what are you doing that for? I told her, and I said, here's the studies. And she said to me, well, I have to disagree, but I can't argue with the evidence. Right? So when people say to me, why do you smoke cigars? Well, I smoke cigars for my health. And I've got empirical evidence to support that. But if you have a look at what the government has done, or all governments have done progressively over, back when Helen Clark really started the anti-tobacco thing, there are actually some beneficial things that come from these products, one of which is nicotine. But all the legislation around smoking and around tobacco products is all about nicotine. But nicotine's not the problem. Right? It's everything else that's around. The nicotine's the addictive element that's contained within those products. And so they focus on that and ignore the beneficial aspects. So, my little journey was about diet and health and all of those things. But as part of that, I came to the conclusion I needed to start smoking cigars.
Well, it is. It's really fascinating. And you raise a couple of points here. there's increasing evidence that nicotine may be beneficial for offsetting some of the side effects from the mRNA COVID jab. I don't know whether you're aware of that. And the other point, Cam, which I think I must emphasize, is that nowadays is a time when it is the most wonderful time for us to be alive. Thank God for modern medicine.
Yeah.
Now, but we must clarify, thank God for modern emergency medicine.
Yep.
Right now, at this time, is the best time ever in history to suffer an acute medical event or accident, to be run over by a bus, to have a stroke, for example, because of the modern emergency medical treatments that are available.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. When it comes to preventing or rehabilitating after these events, when it comes to preventing diseases related to modern lifestyle, poor nutrition, exposure to toxins, aging, stress, those sorts of things, modern medicine, allopathic medicine, is a complete and utter failure. Okay? We must distinguish between medicine applied to those so-called degenerative or lifestyle or aging-related conditions and being run over by a bus or suffering a massive heart attack or a stroke.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
we don't have to look very far, though, to see where modern medicine or modern advice has failed us. Because if you look at society in New Zealand pre-1950, we were pretty fit and healthy. There wasn't a huge obesity issue amongst New Zealanders, and yet we have they call it an obesity epidemic now. And it always makes me laugh because you can't catch obesity, right? It's not a virus. It's not a bacterium, right? It's a simple fact that you've oversupplied your body with energy, and it's decided to do what our body is designed to do when it has abundance, to store some of that energy for use at a later date, because we're probably going to go through some periods of some scarcity. So the human body, we're fighting against evolution, really. The human body is designed to do that. And so we've got this obesity, they call it an obesity epidemic. And by saying it's an epidemic means that theoretically the solution is simple, take a pill or do something like that. But the reality is you actually need to expend more energy than you're putting in to avoid obesity. But nobody's prepared to use that as a solution. Now, you're a nutritionist, so you know exactly what I'm talking about here. It's the type of things. And I have done a bit of research in this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the food pyramid that started to be promoted in the 1950s is probably the cause of the obesity epidemic, because we're loading up on the very things that the human body finds toxic and not eating the things that we actually need to do. And I've always found doing the opposite of the food pyramid that the medical professionals push has actually worked better for me, in that I eat more protein and eat more raw foods and not as many processed foods, and much less grains or, wheat and things like that is right at the top, and that they tell us that that's what we should be eating the most of. And the reverse of that is actually true. And so you lose weight faster if you eat a high protein diet than you would if you ate, say, a high gluten diet.
Yes, it's a little bit more complicated, but you're dead right. Look, I've got Dr. Kellogg's home medicine book. It's a huge volume, like a big Bible, which is a family heirloom that's been passed down through the generations of Mollers. And that was published about 1890.
Yep.
And Dr. Kellogg founded the Sanitarium Health Food Company.
Yep.
Now, it is said that somebody came up with the idea of cornflakes.
Yeah.
And probably went to James Kellogg and said, "Hey, Doc, I've got this. What do you reckon?" And the doc experimented with it, and he came up with a use for it, apparently, allegedly. And that was that it was used as a remedy for young or for unmarried men who could not control their urges. And so if
Not
if mum and
particularly
dad,
successful then.
well, if mum and dad, caught Johnny doing something before he was married, he was sent off to Dr. Kellogg. And what Dr. Kellogg did was he fed them cornflakes to control those urges.
Right.
Now, so that was at Dr. Kellogg's sanatorium.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, somewhere along the way, they must have had another conversation which said, hey, these are pretty tasty and are pretty popular. So what do we do with it? Well, somebody came up with the idea, breakfast being the most important meal of the day. But of course, I can remember, having to get up in the morning. I'm a child from the 1950s, and the first person out of bed had to stoke the coals in the coal range. You couldn't cook the porridge, you couldn't cook the bacon and eggs or anything until you got the range roaring away with a fire. The other thing is, I put myself through university by milking cows. That was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I never ate until about 9 o'clock in the morning. The day always started. A lot of
energy for 5 hours.
Yeah, hard physical labor without even a glass of water. Now, if you look at the islands, you look at Samoa, where my partner, her mum and dad came from, okay? People got up before the crack of dawn and often walked several kilometres up to the fields to weed and to harvest the taro and so on. Others would be on the reef fishing, and then others would be preparing the fire to be able to cook the meal. And by the time everything was gutted, prepared and dressed and so on, and then put into the ground with the rocks, nobody had a meal until midday. So breakfast was never the most important meal of the day. It is a modern construct, and its purpose is to sell convenience foods that don't require cooking. Okay?
And most of them are loaded with sugar.
And of course, it's all because it's so easy. You can put cornflakes in a packet, and then all you have to do is add milk and Bob's your uncle. Okay, so that's how it came about. Now, more recently, particularly if you're dealing with young and active people, the message being sent out to nutritionists was that you need to fuel up every 2 hours. And what better way of doing that than to buy yourself some muesli bars, especially the high protein ones. Okay. Yeah. But again, it's a sugar hit. So we've been basically brainwashing people to believe that every 2 hours they've got to have a snack. Now,
breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, supper.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the pioneering New Zealanders, your Colin Meads and your Lahores and all of them, and I even think of my grandparents and the men and the women in my in my family. They were all big, strong, rock-jawed men and women. They were strong
and fueled by protein. Good.
Well, yes, and they didn't snack in between, and they didn't even start with breakfast.
Yeah.
We've been fed a load of cobblers, and the end result is that it's almost as if the whole of New Zealand is pre-diabetic and obese. Okay, and
you look at all of those things that you're talking about for breakfast and lunch, and they all involve breads, wheat, all of these sorts of things, right? I've noticed cutting wheat out of my diet as much as possible. I mean, even having oat type breads. And I look back on my youth. Mum used to make us, especially in winter, used to make us porridge, of course, which is rolled oats. Now, I've found that if I have wheat in my diet, I end up with a crook gut. I put on weight quite quickly. But if I reduce that wheat down to a manageable amount and limit when I have that, and that is usually at breakfast in the form of, a couple of slices of toast, but I'm using oat-based breads now rather than wheat, that my weight just falls off because I don't add any more of the wheat and the things that go with that, like sandwiches and all of those. And we send kids off to school with bread, and sugary stuff that's based around all of that. And they're leading a sedentary lifestyle, and we wonder why they're putting weight on and they're obese, because we're actually filling them up with the wrong sort of stuff at the wrong time.
So there are a couple of things there, Cam. One of the most effective health measures that somebody can do diet-wise is simply to reduce or eliminate grains.
Yeah.
And in particular, wheat and rice.
Yeah.
Oats might be a little bit better, okay? And there are other grains as well. But to move away from the most industrially produced grains would be a good move, because by default, all grains, carbohydrates, are ultimately sugar.
Yeah.
And so by default, if somebody just simply cuts out those primary sources of grains, they are reducing their sugar intake. The other thing is that sugar is pro-inflammatory. Sugar feeds bugs like yeast, viruses, bacteria, and so on, parasites. So if you eliminate carbohydrates, primarily grains, by default, you are going to become healthair. And
end up with more energy too. I've found that I've had more energy by cutting those grains out. And I don't go to extremes. Like, I prefer to eat wild type rices, ancient type rices rather than your jasmine.
Well, there's another factor as well. Industrially produced grains tend to be sprayed with glyphosate.
Right.
Okay. And glyphosate is a herbicide. It is a terrible poison. I've written a few articles on the subject, and it's if somebody cuts out their commercially produced non-organic grains, by default they will be reducing their exposure to glyphosate. Yep. Glyphosate is used as a crop ripener. Just go into Google and type glyphosate and crop ripener and be prepared to be shocked at what you see. And when glyphosate combines with gluten, it effectively renders the gluten into a toxin. Now, that might explain why somebody with a gluten intolerance can go to the south of France or Spain and eat the pastries and not have a problem. That is one of the theories, in that it's not necessarily the gluten that is the main issue. It is the gluten when it's combined with glyphosates.
Well, this is, we've gone from talking about politics to talking about diet and those things, right?
We're digressing.
No, but there's a reason for that, right? So, and let's just touch back on the nicotine and the diet, right? Yeah. So, I'm not vaccinated for COVID-19, right? I've never worn a mask. I've never practiced any of the rules and regulations, and I was never locked down. I did whatever I wanted, right? And I'm admitting that openly on radio, that I did whatever I wanted. But I've also never caught COVID. And, I was smoking cigars once a day during the lockdowns. In fact, it was delightful because I had the time. It takes a long time to smoke a cigar. It takes over an hour for even a small one to smoke. And I'm picking that nicotine is what was stopping me catching COVID when everybody else was having it. And then with the diet that I was having, which also included supplements, including zinc, vitamin B, vitamin D3, and vitamin C, on top of the nicotine, was what stopped that. And then we talk about the diet. And now we get to where I'm heading. Aren't we fighting our own DNA by following these prescriptive solutions, to fight obesity for one, that we're fighting our own DNA and our own ability of our body to fight things off naturally. And you've written an article about this in particular.
Yes.
Then that's what interested me to get you on this show, that melding of politics and understanding our DNA and where that's going from. And you've written an article and you've called it Safeguarding Life's Sacred Code, Protecting DNA and Our Precious Planet, which is on your website, GaryMoller.com. And I found that really fascinating, where you talk about DNA as being a sacred God script. And now we're talking about why we need to be looking at this genetic engineering, genetically modified organisms, the therapeutics bill. All of these things are combining to ankle tap us and take us away from what you call as the God script, the sacred God script of DNA.
Yes, and this is one of the reasons why opposing the therapeutic products bill, which is now legislation, is now an act.
Now, yep.
I believe that the reason why they had to get this legislation through is because it is the mechanism for the fast-track approval of novel new medicines, including mRNA or gene-related therapies.
Yeah.
And that's why they were going to put it through whether the public wanted it or not. It had to go through. There is now an infrastructure in place for the production of millions of doses of mRNA drugs in New Zealand, and there are research projects galore around the country in our universities and so on, all geared up to produce mRNA drugs for every imaginable plant, animal, and human use in New Zealand.
And that's the thing, isn't it? They're going to apply this first to animals and to plants, which means that we will then be ingesting these modified organisms, whether we like it or not.
The person to talk to on this is Dr. Guy Hatchard, who we all know well. Basically, we share our DNA with every other living organism that we know. We talk to our environment, and we principally talk to our environment through our food. And we need to be extremely careful because we share our DNA, and plants share their DNA with us, plants and animals, anything, even possibly through inhalation. Okay. We can't separate ourselves from basically whatever that life force is out there. Okay. I'm not religious, but there is some kind of life force. And DNA seems to be the closest to us understanding what it is, but there's something far greater. All life is one, and we must be very careful. And if you look at all the great religions, one of the common messages, overriding messages, is that man should never be so arrogant as to think he can play God or be God. It always ends in disaster. And here is the ultimate of man attempting to play God. And we don't understand what we are doing, but we know that whenever man has attempted to play God, they have failed terribly. And so my message is don't go down there. And especially, we haven't had the opportunity for a free and open discussion of the science and the ethics of it. Where's the conferences? Where's the debates? Okay, it's just being foisted down our throats.
Well, we saw this during the COVID pandemic where no debate was even entered into. If you tried to debate the merits of compulsory vaccination and mRNA vaccines and everything, you were labelled a conspiracy theorist, a cooker, a nutter. You were demonized if you said, well, hang on a second here. And, I can remember when they were talking about these mRNA vaccines, a very good friend of mine, one of Cam's buddies who's regularly on the radio, would say to me, he said to me, Cam, we don't want to be doing this. He said, I studied mRNA when I was at university. This is a fundamental change to our core code. And I said, whoa, I'm struggling to understand this. As he explained it further, I said, I need an analogy that the everyday person can understand. And he says, well, Cam, you're into computers. This is like somebody designing a piece of code that they claim will run flawlessly on every computer that's ever been built by man, irrespective of the language that was used to build the instruction code of that original computer or the latest computer you've got. These people are telling you that they've written a piece of code that is universal to every single computer. And your body is your own unique computer that's made up of DNA and mRNA strands and instructions. And they're saying, here, apply this piece of code to your computer and it's going to work flawlessly. And I said to him, that's nuts. It can't possibly work. My DNA is different from yours. You're short and fat, and I'm not so short and slightly thinner. That's our genetic makeup. You yourself, Gary, you're much thinner than I am. So that's perhaps your DNA. Perhaps you're helping your DNA by your diet. But everyone's different, and yet we were told, here's this thing that everyone can take, and worse, they said it was safe and effective.
Yeah, completely unsafe and completely ineffective. We've got to realise that it's now Orwellian doublespeak. Well, whatever is the truth is, in fact, the lie.
Well, that's the thing is, it really is. It's almost like they picked up 1984 from George Orwell and didn't take it as a warning, which is what he intended, right? Took it as a manifesto or an instruction book, and then melded that.
So use a manual.
They use a manual, and then they said, well, we need some other things here to make it more palatable. So then they picked up Mein Kampf and also the writings of Goebbels, right, and mixed it all together and gave us this safe and effective. If you take these vaccines, you won't get sick and you won't die. Those were the exact words that Jacinda Ardern used, and politicians all around the world. Joe Biden, many others said, if you take these vaccines, it'll stop you getting COVID. Well, that's not the case.
Well, and in fact, it'll start you getting COVID. It does the opposite as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, the things you took like zinc, especially if it's combined with other nutrients which help to pull the zinc into your cells, you probably caught COVID, but you probably never knew it. You see,
if I did, it was so mild, it didn't even notice.
Well, it's really, yes, it's not a case of whether you catch a disease or not. Look, I've been exposed, I would guess, to every bug under the sun, including every herpes infection you can think of. But it comes down to not so much whether you catch things, it comes down to symptoms.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, whether you have mild symptoms or whether you have life-threatening symptoms. And this is where having a robust body through good nutrition, good lifestyle, sleep, stress management, etc. These are the keys. Okay, it's not about whether or not you catch the disease; it's how your body manages the disease and ultimately develops a degree of immunity, resistance to further infections. And that's what we should be focusing health on. Now, by the way, let's just digress a little wee bit.
Again.
You were talking about, this is wide-ranging, you're talking about the 1950s, okay?
Mm.
Now, I can remember the 1950s, and there was a health crisis. We really did have a post-war health crisis. Now, our wise and very practical forefathers, my parents and my grandparents, they came up with the solutions. And by the way, politicians were not career politicians back then.
No.
They were people who had been successful in their own right, who then felt it their civic duty to give back to society. Okay? Yeah. Now, so what did they do? They embarked on basically a public health program, putting in sewerage. I can remember when the sewer line was dug in and we got rid of the outhouse, okay? They put in water treatment to reticulated water. They came up with the Sunshine School design, which is a fascinating concept.
It's all around vitamin D,
a dental
isn't it?
nurse. Yeah, there was a dental nurse in just about every primary school. The local farmers were contracted to supply a half pint of fresh full cream milk for every primary school child. Postage stamps were used to fund health camps. Yeah. And we had the Plunkett nurse and so on. Now, those, if you think of those are all primary health investments. New Zealand went from a health crisis to being within the top 3 or 4 countries in the world for health measures. We were competing with Finland, Sweden, Norway for child health, for being the healthiest place to raise a child. Then, from the mid-1970s, we began our love affair with patent medicine. And we were the second country in the world around 1980, somewhere around there, to allow direct-to-customer television advertising of pharmaceuticals. The United States was the first.
Yeah.
And we have deteriorated now to the point where we're competing to be in the bottom 3 in the developed world for health. Okay, we've gone the complete opposites. It's a disaster, and what this current setup is that they are now not just asking us, but they're forcing us to do more of the same. More of what has failed us, to spend more money on basically patent medicines when they have failed us terribly. We need to go back to the basics of investment. By the way, I forgot to mention as well the state housing program. Hey, the government back there, they built suburbs and suburbs of the most beautiful modern homes. Okay, and we've had a government that seemed to struggle to build one.
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea.
No, I mean, I've used the analogy that if you sat them in a room full of Lego, they couldn't build a house. So I mean, you're exactly right. We've had these politicians, and I'll call them academic politicians, right? They're book-learned, politicians who think that if you just apply more money, or if we order people to do things, that it'll just happen. A case in point is Kiwi Bill, where Phil Twyford said, we'll get this happening. But there's no way that the government had the capacity to build a house, even a single house, that they were going to have to rely on the private sector. But there was no connection between slogans, election slogans, and the reality. And that's what I fear about MMP and where we're heading. And I detect that's what you fear as well, which is why we've kind of started this discussion, you and I, is, you wanted to see New Zealand First come in because you felt they had good solutions, but we're sitting there with National Party being dominant aided by the ACT Party, which is, they're not too dissimilar in their global outlook on things, seemingly beholden to solutions that aren't solutions. And you've got this bulwark of New Zealand First there, hopefully, who can say, no, we need to pull out of this. We need to stop this. I mean, there's some drop-dead dates with the therapeutics bill, isn't there? Where if we don't pull out by the 1st of December, then we're kind of screwed.
Yes, you're right. We are. And our big hope, what we did hope for, Cameron, was getting sufficient New Zealand First MPs and other independents with similar views into Parliament so that we held the balance of power. And one of the there were a number of things we want to negotiate. And one of them, of course, is the repeal of the Therapeutic Products Act.
Yeah.
It needed to go. If that was the only thing to go, that would have been a wonderful victory. There also needed to be other things, of course, like a proper, free and open review, investigation into the COVID response, including this whole issue of vaccine injuries. We needed to, and we still need to have this debate about the science and the ethics of gene therapies.
Yeah,
that is crucial. But unfortunately, because of big egos,
hubris, arrogance, and ego.
Yeah, we're down several MPs on where we should be.
Yeah,
because what should have happened is that the parties that were obviously the 1%ers, a decision needed to be made about 2 weeks before polling booths opened, that the 1%ers needed to honourably step aside. Look, Cameron, I relate this to like running a marathon. I've run many marathons. My sister went to 4 Olympics running marathons. And even though it's an individual competition where there's only one winner, and it can be one winner out of 1,000, most of us are condemned to being losers in life, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't enthusiastically participate. But here's the thing, okay? It's actually a cooperative effort where, so when the marathon starts, and you just watch any big marathon, they run together, they help, they pull each other along, they assist, they might even share a drink amongst each other. But when you come then to the last, there comes a point where there's a crunch point where you say, okay, there's now going to be one winner.
Yeah.
And people then make their moves, okay? And there's a winner. And at the end, you congratulate and you shake hands for a race well run, a race well fought. Now, the problem with that happened here is that come hell or high water, those 1%ers were not going to concede that they'd lost the race.
Yeah.
Okay? They weren't. And
they ignored polls. They ignored polls. They ignored everything.
They went a step further and they started to try and trip. Okay? You just imagine running in a running race where you're getting towards the end and it's becoming obvious who's winning. So what do? You say,
ankle tap them.
Go for it, Freddie. Go for it, Cam. Okay? You've got it here, mate. Go. Or you trip them up. Okay? Give you a foot trip. Righto? And that's what they resorted to. It was obvious 2 weeks out that Winston was our only hope. New Zealand First, Winston. Okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure. The media went nuclear on Winston.
David Seymour went nuclear on Winston.
Yes, they did. But what was unforgivable, that was understandable because, hey, Winston was going to be a threat to their $55 million slush fund anyway.
Yep.
But what was unforgivable was the other members of the so-called freedom movement. They started to play dirty, okay, with innuendos, with allegations which, in my view, bordered on being defamatory.
Yeah.
And with the result is that they were like a bunch of captains of ships in a convoy And one by one, they're being torpedoed and they're going under. And they were saying, saying to the crew, and the passengers, don't worry, we're not going under. There's going to be a miracle. By the way, we're going to get 2 million votes. Don't know where they're going to come from, but we're going to get 2 million. We had all this. And so the end result is they not only took themselves under, but they put everybody else, well, not everybody, but they put so many other people off. There's already enough damage being done by the mainstream media without them adding to it.
Yeah.
So,
it's a tragedy, really, when you think about it.
It is. We had to get the maximum number of votes. We needed to get MPs in Parliament. That was the goal. It was not about stroking egos.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
No, 100% agree with you. And that was what I was trying to educate people with my show. That,
yes,
talking to all of these different people.
You did a damn good job, Cam. You did a good job.
We've just got to try, and I've been involved in politics all of my life, and I go by my gut feel, and I also based on empirical evidence, is you can't deny evidence, and that's what I said to Matt King. Let's do a poll. If the poll shows you're going to come fourth, well, then will you just give up? And he said, no, I'm not coming fourth. I'm going to win. Well, guess where he came? Fourth. Right, which is what the poll. There were 3 polls done in Northland, and every single one of them said Matt King's coming fourth, and that's exactly where he came. But yet he carried on, and Democracy New Zealand carried on the basis that Matt King was going to win Northland. Ultimately, with hindsight, which is always 2020, it was dishonest. The same as the claim we're going to get there by winning. Justin Southland, there's enough votes there to get 1% to get to 5% of everyone in Southland votes for us. It was dishonest. It was demonstrably false. And now we see, over the past weekend, Liz Gunn saying, I was just joking about the 2 million votes. No, she wasn't. Yeah. I saw the video. She was deadly serious. I don't know whether it was a delusion or if it was a deliberate falsehood. But it led people to believe in something that didn't exist. And if that 1% from NZ Loyal had gone New Zealand First, and that 1% from Democracy New Zealand had gone to New Zealand First, there would now be 3 additional MPs in the House in the form of Kirsten Murfitt and Lee Donoghue, and a couple of others that were clearly freedom candidates, who now are relying on special votes and may or may not get there. And that's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy that could have been avoided.
Yeah, one of the things that, one of the rather despicable tactics that was used, Cam, was this myopic focus on Winston. What was constantly ignored was the fact that behind Winston was a dedicated team of extremely competent people and an impressive set of manifesto or election promises. Okay. Many of those people, you mentioned a few names, are people who were our friends. Okay. Friends of Liz Gunn, of Matt King, and so on. And they let them down. They betrayed them. That was the thing. They said, no way are we going to go with Winston. Winston can't be trusted, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and the National Party
totally ignoring the team that was backing Winston.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've seen it for years. The National Party spent 30 years trying to destroy Winston Peters.
Yes.
Right. And those are the exact lines that you use. That's what the National Party has been saying, and National Party adherents have been saying about Winston Peters for 30 years or more. And these freedom parties took up that cudgel and used them. I mean, I was even subject to a rather defamatory and outrageous attack by a supposed media organization that described what I was doing to educate voters was a psyop, and that I was a creature of the National Party. Just outrageous allegations. but that caused damage. That caused damage to, as you say, those really fine people that could have been in Parliament sitting there working out how we could do that.
I feel really sad for the people who were let down by their leaders. Those leaders, and some of them I've always regarded as friends, but they may not, I'm still their friend, but they may not think of me as their friend anymore. But that's the way it is. But they need to now be eating humble pie. They need to be coming to us, and they need to be apologising.
That's the sad thing, Gary.
Well,
they won't do that because of the narcissism, because of the hubris, because of the arrogance, and it's I describe it as a tragedy, and it is. It was a missed opportunity, and we've just got to work harder now.
One of the things that I've learned, one of the hardest words, first of all, is to say no.
Yeah.
But what's even harder is to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Now, what can I do to make the best of what might be a bad thing? Okay, that's really hard to do. But I think with practice, it actually becomes easier. And because I practice that a lot nowadays. So where do we go from here? What I think, this is what I want people to do. We need to now think 3 years ahead. We need to think about the next election. Now, can I make one point?
Yeah. Because
of this lost opportunity by overinflated, bullheaded egos, people are dying. People are being maimed. Okay?
Yeah.
We have to now face another 3 to 4 years before anything changes. And in fact, things may get worse. People are dying. And that's one of the things that that was completely overlooked when these people said, no way, I'm going to push on, even though I've only got 1%. We're going to get the 200,000 votes, the 2 million votes, and so on. They are costing people's lives. People are being maimed because it allows these lies to continue. We must not forget that, okay?
I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah. Now, it means nothing's going to change for another 3 years and probably another year after that.
At least.
Okay? At least. So...
and this is the point I was making to these smaller parties, right? The ACT Party's been in existence for 35 years. New Zealand First has been in existence for 30 years. That's how long it takes you to get to a credible force in Parliament. You can't expect overnight that you'll get 5%, 6%, 10% overnight. It is a intergenerational journey, and not one single one of those leaders is prepared to embark on that intergenerational journey because it requires discipline, it requires patience, and it requires dedication, and none of them have that. Sadly.
Yes, it takes, you're right. That was one of the reasons for associating with an existing political party, even if we didn't completely like what was there.
That's right.
There's no point in trying to recreate an incredibly complex machine. It's not just a wheel.
It's not easy.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah. Yes, it takes time to build the infrastructure and to weed out the crackpots as well, by the way. Okay? Yeah. So the idea, which we need to continue, is to say, okay, New Zealand First has welcomed us with open arms.
Yeah.
There's been no there's been no subterfuge or what have you.
But a point you raised before about the ability to say sorry. That was the first interview, one of my first shows, right, I had with Winston Peters. Yeah. And I said, you were part of the government that brought in these mandates. And he acknowledged that he was wrong. He said that it was, knowing what he knows now, he wished he hadn't done that. And then in a second interview that I had with him, I said, do you remember Alan Martin used to have the LV Martin ads, and he would always say, it's the putting right that counts. And Winston said, yep. And that's why I'm back. That's why I've come back into the parliament, so that I can right the wrongs. And I believe him. I've seen the resolve in him, that he knows that he was wrong. He's said it out loud, which not very many politicians do. And now it's up to him to grow New Zealand First, and it's up to us and people like the audience here on Reality Check Radio need to get behind that, become involved in those politics. Don't sit back and expect someone else to do it, right? Go and join those political parties. Go and join the National Party and change them one branch at a time, one electorate at a time. Go and join the ACT Party and change them one branch, one electorate at a time. And go and join New Zealand First and power them up so that they aren't a party that disappears after 30 years, that they go on and they're there for another 30 years. And they are looking for the benefits for New Zealand, not for other countries.
Yes. This is really good stuff. We become the party, and the party becomes us.
Correct.
And if you don't become part of the party, if you don't get involved, and it ends up not representing your views, then don't complain. Yeah. That's the
your involvement in
message.
the electoral process is that you go and vote once every 3 years, well, then you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, I actually think that not being involved, well, the real power in politics actually happens at the party level. We need to be involved there. The casting of the votes is like going to a Turkish restaurant and expecting French to be served.
Yeah,
okay,
and complaining that there's no baguettes on the table.
Yeah, I know.
Where's the croissants? You're at a Turkish restaurant, but I want croissants.
If you want a party to provide you with the kinds of policies and to deliver on them, you've got to get involved at the party level. Otherwise, when it comes to casting your vote, well, you're just going to have to accept whatever they serve.
Well, there's an old military saying, right, that comes from at the end of sieges, when the walls are finally breached, what the generals would do is they would send in a forlorn hope, right, where it was led by a junior officer and a sergeant and a bunch of reprobates. And if they survived the battle, then they were promoted, but they were called the forlorn hope because there was a very high chance that going through that breach, they were never going to come back. And that's what these minor parties are often, are the forlorn hope who get mowed down as they go into the breach. I think what we've discussed today, we've been wide-ranging. We've gone from politics to health, back to politics, and then into solutions for the future. It requires these courageous discussions where we're unafraid to actually say what went wrong and try and rectify that. And, people like yourself who've put themselves out there, had a website, put your opinions out there. Those are the people that we should be listening to, people like yourself, people like us here at Reality Check Radio, because we've got our head above the parapet and, but we need other people to join in that fight. And so, I've really enjoyed talking to you today about this. And, I'm pretty sure this is going to be one of the most replayed interviews that I've had in a long time too, because it's so wide ranging.
Forlorn defeat or glorious in victory?
Well, I prefer to look on things to be glorious in victory. No one likes coming second, right? You used your sporting analogies and marathons. Does anyone ever remember who came second in the New York Marathon in 1988? Nobody does, right? Or who won the silver medal in any of the Olympics for marathons? Nobody remembers them, right? So glorious victory.
For those in the know, we know that for there to be a victor, there must be others.
Many losers.
Yep, there's many losers, and there's there's nothing to be ashamed of or to be depressed about by not winning.
But you've got to give it a go.
Absolutely the icing on the cake.
Yep.
And it's an extremely rare experience for the vast majority of us. But look, I've spent my entire life getting beaten. I've been winning lately. But it's mainly because I waited for all my opposition to die off.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You wear them down. It's like, people keep said to me, you're irrelevant or that, and yet the people who are saying that are the ones who are listening.
Well, Cam, I'm doing a Winston, or maybe Winston's doing a Gary. Hey, He's following me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Gary, thank you so much for coming on The Crunch. I really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
I really seem to get distracted sometimes, and I did it again with Gary because we ranged far and wide in the interview, and it's something that I do these days. But I find it energizing and invigorating to discuss lots of different topics. He's a fascinating and thoroughly likable bloke, and it was a real pleasure to discuss health, nutrition, politics, and the lost opportunities with him today. Don't forget to send comments on Gary's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You've heard the words open, fair, both sides of the story. It's easy to say them, but practicing them often seems like a bridge too far. New Zealand, it's time for a reality check. RCR, Reality Check Radio. Rational discussion, common sense, and open debate for real. With me, Paul Brennan. You just can't make this stuff up. You couldn't write the script. Veteran broadcaster Peter Williams.
Where is the evidence they actually make a difference? It turns out that was a very fair question to ask.
Taking on the mainstream, Chantel Baker.
Mainstream media, as usual, in their little perch.
The man who cares so much and whose background is for real, Rodney Hyde.
The doctors don't believe them. They can't get ACC. They can't work. They're told it's all in their head.
Along with a raft of contributors to inform, entertain, and bring the truth back to New Zealand media. It's time for a reality check, all right. RCR, Reality Check Radio at www.realitycheck.radio. We've arrived.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Now it's time for Cam's Buddies. This week we'll find out what they think of Wayne Brown a year after his election as Mayor of Auckland. He's proposing fewer local boards, but giving them more power and more funding. Let's see what the buddies think about all that. My producer's got them all lined up and ready to go. So let's hear what Cam's Buddies have to say about Mayor Wayne Brown. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Paul. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Cam, and good afternoon.
Yeah, I thought the topic for discussion today would be Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown. He's been in the job for just over a year. He's put a proposal forward to the Council's Joint Governance Working Party that would see fewer local boards, but given more power to make larger scale decisions and also give them increased funding. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but or aware of it. But what do you think about his past year and these proposals?
The proposal to have a bit more autonomy in our local area, I think I would like that. If we could talk to the local person and say to them, put in a cycleway at your peril, or make our roads narrower at your peril, and then there was fewer of them and you could vote them out and get someone in a smaller effort to do that, I'd be pleased with that. Also, if there's less people in the council, in my view, there's too many people making too many decisions and they're not a united front. So when when you look at Auckland Council, it's not like a business. It's like he has to be a lobbyer to get the people on side so that they can pass any form of governance, because he's on one voice, and that would be a very difficult thing to work out, I believe. I was listening to Morris on talking at some stage when he was saying that even though they're paying a lot of money in interest to hold the shares that they've got in the Auckland airport, for example, it doesn't return to a dividend as much as the interest costs, so that 30,000 houses get to pay their rates solely for the ability for the rest of us to hold these shares. Now, that might be a bit oversimplifying it, because my understanding is when they bought the shares, they weren't that much. But the fact that they could sell them now and they've borrowed money for other things, that's, there's a bit of you've got to be careful what people are saying, because if you bought those shares for $1 and they're paying you $10 worth of dividends, but they're worth $1 million, they're a good investment on what you bought them for, but they're not necessarily a good investment on what you could sell them for.
Yeah.
So when I looked at what he was saying also about having Maori Indigenous seats, or Indigenous people having seats set up separately in the council so that we could consult them, I thought they need to be listening to what happened in Australia with The Voice. The people are not keen on such things, even though the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People, we believe that we've adopted it. It's a load of shit when you read it. What they're saying is give them two voices, give them two votes. And when you have councillors saying, oh, well, I was elected by my constituents, not by the Maori, so I can't act for them. But Asians are twice or three times the number of Maori. Pacifica are a greater number than Maori, and Europeans are a way greater number than Maori. I just think get elected. If Maori want to do things, get elected and they can do them. Now, what are councillors if they're not? See, ratepayers put in a pool of money and councillors decide how we're going to spend it for the best interest of the city.
Mm.
If you're not a ratepayer, should you have a vote as in the Auckland Council? Because if you're not a ratepayer, you're deciding how the people who put the money up should spend it, even though you don't put any money up yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's poor governance. Now, when I look at what is the percentage of ownership of houses of Maori, I think it's something like 38 to 40% of Maori in New Zealand, in Auckland, own their own home. Well, it might be 28 in Auckland, but 40 over the whole country.
Yep.
And so people that don't pay rates shouldn't have all the say. That's not how things work. People who put the money up, they get to have the say. So if I'm paying rates and I'm paying $5,000 a year, then I get a vote. And if I'm paying nothing,
you'd be wishing you could pay $5,000 a year, wouldn't you?
That would be my dream. But I know a lot of people do pay $5,000 a year. My rates are just a little more than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument that renters do pay rates, but indirectly via the landlord. But I really struggle with this concept. If you don't own property and you don't pay rates directly, it used to be that wherever you own property, you had a vote. Now the way it is you might have a property in the Coromandel, for example, but you don't get to have a vote in the Coromandel district because you don't live there. And but actually you're paying rates there and contributing to the local council economy by having that property there, but they don't give you a say. And I really struggle with this general competence and allowing any man and his dog to have a vote when they're not paying directly from their own pocket.
I agree with you, because when we decide how we're going to spend other people's money, who are the other people? And normally the other people are middle-aged white male. And that's the only group of people you can mock. That's the only group of people that are allowed to be the butt of every joke with no recrimination. And no consequences. But they're the ones that pay all the money to make the world go round. But they're the ones that are considered and treated the most poorly. But let's have Maori councillors that can veto and do all sorts of things that aren't necessarily needing to be elected. They just get gifted such things. Now, if they have to be elected by Maori, why don't Maori just put up candidates and elect them in the normal manner? What's the number of, I think in the 17 election and the general election, I think 25% of the candidates were Maori.
Mm.
And,
in the most recent
they got there on their own,
right.
with the exception of with 2 or 3. And now we've just had New Zealand First going into Parliament. Their top 3 positions are all held by Maori. I mean, I look and I think, so there will be more Maori in Parliament. They're sharp. They know what they're doing. They get elected if they wish to be, and all is well. We don't need to be pandering and saying to the world, we better help them up here because they're too stupid to do it for themselves. They outperform us in all sorts of areas, and by us, I mean the average New Zealander is outperformed by a Maori politician every which way. They get more money, they get more seats, they get more coverage. And I'm thinking, and then we want to help them and give them, in local government, the same sort of thing when there's as many Maori in the local government as want to put their name forward and do the work and get elected.
Yes, good points that you raised there. One thing that really rips my undies driving around Auckland is this proliferation of these speed bumps where there are pedestrian crossings. Did anyone vote for that? And then it usually goes hand in hand with the stealing of half of a lane for a cycleway. And I've never seen a cyclist on the cycleways, and these massive bumps that they're putting in all around the place are just causing snarl-ups in traffic, and not a single person was asked if they wanted it. But somehow they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on each one of them.
Yes, but then they paint them with white arrows on them that fades, so then you're driving along or on a wet road and it just looks like black bitumen because now the paint is faded. And you smash the front out of your car unless you know your way around there. They aren't labelled as such. There's not a stick sticking up off the side of the road saying there's a speed bump here. And once the paint fades a little, they do damage to a lot of cars. That's what I imagine. All the Remuera mums have to drive 4-wheel drives now because they don't need to worry about spotting them. But I think the best thing we could do about those is every time you go over one, toot your horn for 4 seconds. Yeah. Then the people will be so pissed off around them that they will ask to have them removed by the council because it will just drive them mad. And I think that would be a reasonable plan. Or every time you go over one, go around to some council-type manager's place and toot your horn for 5 minutes. So that if you did 6 of the day, you have to go around there for half an hour because they are just the biggest menace of things around. And set a speed camera, set a speed that is needing to be policed, and most reasonable people drive at the speed limit.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Outside my place here in Takapuna, we had 3 nights of interrupted sleep because the council decided to turn part of the road into 30 kilometres an hour. Again, no one was consulted on this. We've had these new signs put up, these red stripes put on the road, and everyone dutifully ignores them because it's impossible to drive on that road at 30 kilometres. In fact, you're struggling to do it at 50 because of all the traffic that's doing it. But, I mean, no one asks us as ratepayers, do you want this? It's just done, and it's presented as a fait accompli at vast expense, extortionate type expense. I understand that it costs the council somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000 per one of those bumps that they put in for the pedestrian crossings. I mean, it's ludicrous amounts of money.
I can believe that because what you have to do to get such a thing is you have to design it engineeringly. You've got to get the water to flow around it. There's quite a lot of other things that go with it so that then you can have built something that's annoying and no one appreciates. Now, I get the idea that we might need something to tell us there's a pedestrian crossing, but normally it's either a light or people with visible clothing that are about to cross. And there's a pit. Like, I don't see people racing over pedestrian crossings, and I don't hear much of pedestrians being mown down by drivers that can't see them. And yet they have to have these stupidity bumps to make sure that we can go at a silly slow speed.
So to summarise, you're okay with having less community boards with increased powers if they start actually listening to not just the voters, but the ratepayers, the people who actually shovel the money in that they seem to gleefully and wantonly spend.
Yes, and I'm opposed to specific Maori council seats. Although I think Wayne Brown was on Maori TV, he was on the board of Maori TV at some stage, wasn't he? He might have a leaning towards helping such folk, but I think the way you help such folk is you say, get the votes, do the work, you'll be elected, the end.
Yeah, that's it. That's what democracy is all about. And, you're right. You look at New Zealand First, Winston Peters, Shane Jones, Casey Costello, 3 superb Maori politicians elected there in their own right, not because they're Maori.
But when I talk to any of them, and I've talked to a couple of them, I don't think Maori politicians, I think New Zealander.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem.
And when I think New Zealander, we're all good to go. And if you look at me, my skin is very brown. I'm often asked, what tribe am I from? And I don't let on where I'm from. I don't let on my heritage because it's no one's business. But I'm thinking, when people see me, I hope they see New Zealander. And when I see these other folk, I think New Zealander, the end.
Mm. Well, if we could all think that way, I think
except
our life would improve.
I think Fijian.
Yeah, except me, I'm Fijian. Yeah, exactly. Well, Paul, Vinaka Vakalevu, thank you for your comments, and we'll talk next week.
Thank you, mate. Bye for now.
Bye. Good afternoon, Jack. Welcome to The Crunch and Cam's Buddies.
G'day, Cam. I understand you had a blown eardrum. How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I just woke up with a whole lot of blood all over my pillow, went up to emergency department at North Shore Hospital and found out I had a burst eardrum. They think it was probably a bit of an infection in the ear, although I don't sort of feel sick or anything. And I've got 2 weeks of recovery to get that back. So I'm a little bit. People accuse me of being one-eyed, and at the moment I'm one-eared.
Well, yeah. Having had that done myself, I have bad news for you. At your age, it's not fixable. If you're 6 or 7, they could put a grommet in and it would repair itself.
Oh, no, so, I'm told it'll repair itself, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but it's North Shore Hospital. What the hell do they know?
Yeah, well, I'm told the ambulance drivers call it Not Shore Hospital.
Yeah.
So anyway, topic for this week. We've had just a bit over a year of Wayne Brown as the mayor. He's made a couple of suggestions in the past week on wanting to reduce local boards from 22 boards to 13. And although there'll be reduced representation, they'll have better powers to make decisions and increased funding for those boards. So I'm looking for your feedback on that idea and just in general, how you think he's gone after a year in the job.
Well, over 50 years ago, I was an engineering assistant in what was then the Waitemata County Council, now the Auckland City Council, and I had a mentor. And my mentor had worked for Becca Carter, very good engineer, and he started talking about this bloke, Wayne Brown. I mean, we're talking back here in the late 60s, early 70s. He said, oh, this guy's a genius. Watch this space. This guy's going to go places. So I've been waiting for 50 years. And Wayne Brown's 6 months older than me. And I'm thinking, what the hell are you doing? He must have more energy than me. But he is a visionary. And he must be so frustrated. It reminds me of when I was on a parent-teacher association at my son's school. And sitting around a room there, which would be just like he does when he's sitting around with his other people in the mayoralty, and a hell of a lot of talking and absolutely nothing gets done. It's a real eye-opener, and I think he's a guy that just wants to cut to the chase and remove all the gobbledygook, yuck speak, and get on with it. And for that, he's got my support.
You know, I was just talking with Paul about the council expenditure and how we seem to have, all of a sudden 30-kilometre zones popping up everywhere that no one was consulted on. these appalling bumps in the road wherever there's a pedestrian crossing that magics itself up in order to test our suspension in the front end of our cars and the back end as we go over them. And nobody seems to consult us about these sorts of things, even though we're paying with our rates these exorbitant sums of money. And at the same time, we've got these massive debt in the council, at the same time as wanting to hold on to a few shares in Auckland Airport. I would have thought that would be more important to get under control than worrying about the number of boards that we've got.
Yeah, and just remember, when you make the laws too onerous, nobody obeys them. So maybe he wants to get some extra money through ticketing, I don't know. But, you can sort of law the hell out of people, but at the end of the day, they just turn a blind eye to it and carry on as normal.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's
whether that was his idea.
I doubt it's his idea. It'll be some, council traffic engineer who's decided, let's make life difficult on this street. I mean, just earlier this afternoon before coming to here, I was over in Herne Bay and taking a back street to get to the road to take me to the harbour bridge. And I swear to God, there was 20 of the most enormous, almost mountainous speed bumps on this one street. Just a huge endless line of traffic doing 20 kilometres an hour just to climb over these bumps. And I'm thinking, I'm starting to think maybe there's a few councillors or city engineers or something like that live on Sarsfield Street or something like that, and they want everyone to drive around at pedestrian sort of speeds, because it was just... It
tells me nothing has changed. Since I was in engineering, nothing has changed. But, hey, maybe he's going for a record, because I remember when I was in Vanuatu once and I had a car, there's so many bumps there, they said they had the world record for the most number of suspension changes. Maybe we're going for that.
Well, I don't know. The road from Nandi to Suva has bumps, but they're depressions, actually, and we wouldn't even call them potholes. They're more like chasms or canyons.
Yes.
They'll swallow a small car if you're not careful. And suspension.
I know. I've driven that road. It's not good. Vanuatu's worse.
Yeah, Vanuatu's not that bad, but there's just not as many roads as there are in Fiji.
I think Wayne Brown's got a hell of a road ahead of him. He's trying to do the best he can, but he'll be surrounded by frigging idiots, unfortunately, and that's hard work. All the way, he'll be in battle.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Idiots and stupid people surround us. There's actually probably about the same number of idiots and stupid people in Auckland Council as there are road cones on our streets.
Well, I may be a bit cynical, but I think 95% of all New Zealanders are totally stupid, and the other 5% are suspect.
I'm a little bit different from you. I think it's 95% are desperately stupid, about 4% marginal, and 1% have got their wits about them.
Well, you're not far off my stats.
Yeah, maybe we're just old, curmudgeonly, cynical old bastards. And
you're not even old. I don't know what you're talking about. You're just a young buck.
I don't know. I'm 55 next week.
That's young.
Yeah.
Although if you were North African, you'd be twice dead. But we won't talk about that.
No, we won't. All right, Jack, thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate those, and we'll talk next week.
Nice talking to you. Bye.
Bye. Welcome to the Crunch and Cam's Buddies, Jimmy.
G'day, Cam. How are you today?
Yeah, boxing on, even though I've got a burst eardrum, and people accuse me of being one-eyed, and now I'm one-eared. So, it's a bit of fun.
Well, I've known you for a fair while, mate, and you're fairly one-eyed, and one ear suits you.
I'm a bit different from my early days in the blogging world.
Certainly
anyway,
mellow, mate. Certainly mellow. I'll give you that.
I've been slowed down a lot. But I've got a tricky question for you this week. Yeah, it's a tricky one, Jimmy. We've had Wayne Brown as the Auckland Mayor for just a bit over a year. I'm interested to know what you think about how he's gone and what you think of his new proposals to reduce the number of local boards from 22 to 13, but giving them more power and more decision-making abilities as well as additional funding.
Well, I have actually read a few bits and pieces on this, and
I always like to hear about shrinking bureaucracies. It's always a positive. But also, I'm not that sure about centralising more power either. So I'm not sure. And he's sitting on the fence on Maori wards as well, I understand.
Yeah, I'm not really that enamoured with Maori wards. One of the buddies earlier.
No, I certainly am not either.
Yeah, Paul was saying, stand for election, get elected, like, Winston Peters and Shane Jones and Casey Costello, 3 Maori that lead New Zealand First. They've managed to get elected not because they're Maori, but because they're good at what they do. And, Maori are pretty competent when it comes to public speaking and those sorts of things. I believe if they stood in ordinary wards that they'd still be elected. And I don't think we need
to have. Of course they would.
I don't think we need to have special wards on the basis of race, because then what do you do? Do you have a Pacifica one? Do you have, one for Chinese or one for Indians? Where does it end?
Well, I completely agree, and that's why wards are absolutely crazy. Basing any sort of democracy around race is just nuts. I see in Parliament we have more than 25% of the MPs have Maori ancestry. There's an overrepresentation of Maori.
Yeah, I don't think we should change that, though. I don't think we should change that. No. Maori have been elected on their own merits. There's only 4.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's great. It's fantastic, but it just shows you don't necessarily need to specifically have Maori. So why would Maori wards be any different? But as for shrinking the local boards, shrinking bureaucracy is good. Centralising bureaucracy is usually bad. I'm torn, Cam. I'm torn. I don't know. I'd have to look into it more.
Well, I'm a big fan of Roman history, and I believe that we should treat council and government workers the same way that the generals treated their soldiers if they lost battles, where they would then decimate the survivors to improve morale.
So, of the 13 boards that survive, you want to decimate them, politically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, just not just the boards, but look at the, when we were sold the idea that Super City was going to give us, savings, one of the things was we were going to not have as many staff. Well, there's more people working for Auckland City now than the 3 cities that were combined to make Auckland City. And and we haven't had a corresponding increase in services. In fact, they've got worse. So, I'm of the opinion that perhaps we should take an axe to staffing levels at least 10%, and that won't even get us back to where it should be. Maybe we should be doing a double decimation and take out 20% of them.
Well, that's a good point. So the centralisation that Wayne proposes may end up with increased staff numbers due to quirks of bureaucracy and actually cost more than...
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? That we worry about, because like when politicians do things, they often don't think them through as clearly as other people, although Wayne Brown seems to have a bit of clarity in thinking. But, in the past and, certainly in the future, we're going to have politicians making crazy decisions without any thought of the consequences, unintended or intended.
Well, that's exactly right. So I think that, I guess to summarise, that I support shrinking of the boards as long as there's a protocol in place where the bureaucracy can't balloon and create even more cost.
Yeah.
It's just gobbling up more rates money. So, yeah.
So you being a small government person, you'd be saying, yep, that's good. Let's reduce the number of boards. Theoretically, it should reduce the costs, and let's see how it goes.
Well, that's what Wayne's point was, is that he considers a lot of the 21 boards existing do duplicate work, which is a direct cost.
Yeah.
So you axe that. But as you say, we have to be careful that the boards don't grow like the Super City ended up actually doing. So we have to put protocol in place to stop that or limit the amount of staff. Otherwise, the same happens again. Good intentions become bad policy, as quite often happens in this country.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions, isn't it?
Yes.
And sometimes those good intentions become potholes.
Yes. Oh, mate, you're on fire.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents, mate.
All good. Thank you very much for that, Jimmy. We'll talk next week.
Thanks.
Welcome to Cam's Buddies and the Crunch. Miles, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you this afternoon?
Yeah, box of birds, apart from my wonky ear, but that's all going to heal okay. It's all fine. Hasn't stopped me doing what I do best.
Excellent. I'm pleased to hear that. It's great to speak to you again.
Bit of a curveball for you today. We're sort of getting off national politics and back to local body politics. Wayne Brown's been the mayor of Auckland now for just over a year. I'm interested in your thoughts on how he's gone, where he should be going, and more importantly, his latest proposal, which is to reduce the local boards from 22 to 13, reducing the number but increasing, as he says, additional powers for them, and also additional funds for those boards.
Okay, so I guess that, firstly, I live in Auckland, and this is a topic very close to my heart because I think the Auckland super city was all hellfire and amalgamation and all about saving money through cutting duplication of services. And how did that turn out? Well, it was a big bust. Auckland grew, Auckland City, especially the administrative side, grew like topsy. And it was just unchecked, unbridled spending, and that's been reflected in rate rises because there's no incentive for Auckland to do any better, especially if they can just charge their ratepayers. And I think that all ratepayers across New Zealand would think the same way. However, let's get on to Wayne Brown. He was elected a year ago, I think on October 28th, his first year. I'm not quite sure. And I think that he has some notable achievements in bringing particularly hospital boards into line, but I was interested to see what he'd do in Auckland. So this is one of his first, I guess, major changes. He's made a lot of little changes. I'm in support of it. So Here's what I think. I think local boards were too much and there wasn't really any incentive to go to the local boards. After all, why would you when you could go to the councillor? So I thought to myself, I wonder what this actually means. Well, if I think there's, say, 21 odd local boards reduced down to 13, and just for those outside of Auckland, it's going to be 11 on the mainland, so to speak, and 2 island boards. That's going to reduce the number of board members by about 48 to 50, roughly speaking.
Yep.
This, I think, is a great thing. I mean, the gravy train of being a local board member must be marvellous. And I'm thinking that Wayne Brown has got his head screwed on by starting reforms at the bottom. And I like the cut of his cloth.
Yeah, it's interesting because...
What does this actually mean? Well, it means that all those local boards with 6 or so representatives will be just amalgamated and all those budgets will be amalgamated. Do I think that's going to matter in terms of my voice?
Well, they don't listen to us anyway.
Yeah, I'm cynical about my voice mattering, and here's why. Auckland Transport, the master of all things transport in Auckland, from buses to speed limits to cycleways, has pursued a course, I would say, that has been ideological, putting in cycleways, reducing speed limits to 30k.
Those horrendous bumps that
putting
are all
in,
over the city.
Yeah, exactly. I'm horrified at what Auckland Transport has been getting away with, and my voice doesn't seem to matter. I've contributed on a number of different submissions, as I'm sure a lot of Aucklanders have, and they don't listen. So here's what I think about Wayne Brown. Good on you, Wayne.
I reckon he needs to pick up a very sharp axe and swing it with gay abandon inside the council.
Yeah, I think he needs to really start pruning. And if he starts pruning with the local boards, so be it. That's 48 less elected representatives. Do I think it will matter to my voice? As I've alluded, I don't think it'll matter one jot. Do I think it'll matter to the budget? Why, yes, I do. There will be a hell of a lot of ancillary staff, facilities, and a lot of other expenses associated with all those boards. And by reducing that, it can only be a good thing.
So broadly, you're in agreement with what Wayne Brown is doing, and
I think,
and hope he goes a bit further.
Yes, I think that's true. I think Wayne Brown has discovered the complexities of local government, and running a council as the Mayor of Auckland, you have to remember he only has one vote on the council.
Yep.
Where Wayne Brown's power lies is in the ability to appoint chairman and so forth in committees. So that's where his power lies, and his power also lies in what he's doing right now, restructuring. So I think he has gotten his head around how local government works, and I think this might be the first step in a number of changes, and I'm hoping that, firstly, the size of the staff at Auckland City gets brought under control.
Well, let's hope he does manage to do that and some more, because the long-suffering ratepayers of Auckland are still copping increases when, decreases were promised, and that's something that no local body politician has ever managed to achieve. It seems there's this inexorable rise of rates to the point where it's almost at rent levels for some properties.
Correct, and I'm thinking this tax on us, we see very little for it, and there's very little complaints apart from the ratepayers. Now, from my perspective, council should be listening to the ratepayers and giving them a voice. They're the people that pay the bills, and they're the people that are just treated as a ATM. Indeed, the council, if they go over budget, they just go along to the ratepayer ATM and punch up a couple of $100 million more.
Yep, you feel like you're being frisked every 5 minutes and your wallet pilfered by the council.
Correct, and what I want to see is how Wayne Brown's reforms, starting with this, will make a difference to the expenditure of the council.
Well, let's hope he does exactly that, and we should be able to talk about that in future Cam's Buddies. And in the meantime, I might even think about getting the Mayor on the show and putting some of these questions directly to him as well.
Listen, I think Wayne Brown would welcome the chance to talk with someone who hasn't got an axe to grind in a manner that you approach things. So I think, that would be a very good idea. I'd look forward to hearing that.
I'll see if I can organise it for you. Anyway, thank you for calling in to Cam's Buddies this week, and we'll talk next week. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you.
There you have it, the unvarnished views of voters in Auckland about Mayor Wayne Brown. My buddies are awesome. They never, ever let me down in sharing their views. Tell us who you think is the best of Cam's Buddies this week and why that is by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
RCR is on a mission to revive honest media, and now you too can be an integral part of it by joining the RCR Foundation Members Club. Receive exclusive benefits only available to club members, including your own backstage pass to join the hosts for interactive behind-the-scenes discussions, along with our all-new daily curated news summary, RCR Bites, that's delivered to your email box every morning, keeping you on the pulse of the news that matters in just a few minutes per day. To find out more, visit realitycheck.radio/members to see how you can join the mission that's making a difference.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Now, one of my favorite parts of the show, it's the mailbag. Let's see what we've got. Have we got bouquets or brickbats? We'll start off with some general feedback. Simon says, "Hey Cam, wow, good times. I enjoy your interviews because you have a very profound honesty. Didn't know who you were beforehand except some whale thingamajig, lol." Ron says, "Hi Cam, love your opinions on the political debate. They are very unbiased and level-headed. I voted for Liz Gunn and it was a heart vote as I knew Peters would get over the threshold. Peters is a politician and the only vote in reality. You made a great point about the other people on their list that can make a difference. One area that does concern me, and I guess it is a historical thinking, but why do all the seats go to National and Labour, give or take a couple of other smaller parties, ACT, Greens and Maori? Logically, and I use that word with tongue-in-cheek, wouldn't it serve the community more with an independent? And the only thought that I have is that they, the voters, think that they need a large party to get local policies through. Love to hear your thoughts and really believe you have great political insights." Yeah, Ron, look, that's something that really bugs me, that essentially for the electorates, it's the red team or the blue team. And I'm very pleased to see ACT, the Greens and the Maori Party actually picking up some electorates off Labour and National. It doesn't matter so much in the end of the day in terms of the overall result, but I think it's good to have local representation that's not represented by one or other of the two major parties. Susan writes and says, "Hi Cam, I enjoy your political analysis and agree that taxpayers shouldn't be funding media, cultural events and entertainment, but appreciation of classical music in New Zealand is actually growing in popularity because a large number of Chinese and Korean immigrants play classical music. So I think you very much underestimate its relevance. If taxpayers funded only the basics, we could each keep more income and pay for whatever we support. In my case, RCR and classical music." And Susan, you raise a good point there, but I'll bet you to your bottom dollar that those Chinese and Korean immigrants aren't listening to classical music on the concert program. I reckon they're probably listening to it on Spotify, which is what I was actually saying. Instead of spending tens of millions of dollars on a radio frequency, just give the very few, and it would be very few people who enjoy classical music, access to a Spotify account if they're of low means to be able to do it themselves. I mean, a Spotify account's very low cost, and there's no need for us to spend tens of millions of dollars on broadcasting it to the less than 1,000 people who probably listen. Glenn also comments on this and says, "Abolish Concert FM, defund the NZSO, wash your mouth out, Cameron Slater, you Philistine." Well, I might be a Philistine, but it's my money that's paying for those super subsidised seats for the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. I'd also defund the ballet as well while we're at it and have a go at the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. There's no need in a modern society for the state to be funding all of this to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So I might be a Philistine, but I want my money spent on things that I appreciate, not what you appreciate. And that sounds grumpy and curmudgeonly, but hey, that's me. Araha writes, "Cam, I was one of the people you said, you must be joking when you joined RCR. I'm 76 and I well remember your whale oil nastiness, but thought they, RCR, aren't stupid. And then I read your story and I listened to a couple of crunches. And after that, had the mission to convert doubting friends. And as you said in your post-election session with Paul and Marty, your great strength is you listen to your guests and engage with them and don't go for the aggressive confrontational hits that the current MSM journalists do. Kia kaha. Thank you so much, Araha. I appreciate those thoughts. And I am trying to be different from back in the whale oil days, and it looks like it's working. Another Cam writes, boss of state services leaving is interesting institutional knowledge, leaving on strike, in protest, but also what a blessing, gone burger. A couple of comments about Matt McCartan. Anonymous says, good analysis with Matt McCartan, well worth listening to the show. And Kevin says, good discussion with Matt. I'm not political, but I'm getting there. Cam, you mentioned that as a politician, you said you have to lie. Can you give me an example when you think it's acceptable? Well, as a Christian, I don't think it is acceptable to lie. And that's why I have a real problem with politicians who claim that they're Christian and are politicians. I don't believe it's possible for any politician to not lie. And if you remember, Akita, the 2017 election, Jacinda Ardern famously said she believes that she's never told a lie in politics and that she never will. Well, we all know how that ended, and it wasn't well. And the first lie she told was that she's never told a lie. And we've got some comments about Rachel Stewart. Rachel said, what did they think we were doing during lockdown? They thought we were baking sourdough and learning how to knit and not talking to our neighbours, but we were organising. Rachel Stewart is awesome. Really cool discussion with her. Thank you. I love you both. And wrong, Cam. Helen Clark and her policy of interest off student loans was good. We had 7% interest on our loans from day dot of drawdown. By the time we graduated, our loans had doubled or tripled before we even started earning. So that was one thing. Jacinda didn't do anything near that transformative for people. Mike from Foxton, my favourite correspondent. He says, hi, Cam, just listening to your interview with Rachel. What a lovely woman. And as a Boilermaker who was on the march to Parliament in 1978, I can totally relate to her statement about a Labour voter never voting for New Zealand First. I never thought that I would ever not vote for Labour, and I grew up living just up the road from another Boilermaker, Fraser Coleman, a man who went to Mururoa Atoll to protest nuclear testing in the Pacific. A man with integrity, passion, and honesty, qualities missing in the career politician of today. I'm so glad the old regime is out, and may it stay that way for a couple of decades at least, and that we can grow the new people in New Zealand First to be confident, passionate, and honest leaders. Maria from Tauranga writes, enjoyed the interview with Rachel Stewart. She would be a fascinating person to come for dinner. So glad Winston will be at the negotiation table. Bad luck for you, David. You'll be breaking your first promise not to work with him. You're an idiot. I only wish more people understood the wasted vote, to be fair. I only learned the reality of this election. More education is needed to understand it. Such a shame our freedom fighters in New Zealand First didn't make it. I hope they don't give up politics and keep fighting in the Kiwi corner. Diana says, I'm listening to the replay of Cam and Rachel's interview. They both resonated with me. You're both saying what I was thinking. I would have never thought that I would be voting Winston, but here we are. He was the only logical choice for a freedom thinker. Unlike Rachel, I've been an ACT voter since Rodney's days and even voted in Epsom. Like Cam, I could not bring myself to vote for any of the 120 MPs who would not speak to the protesters. And Jacinda Jabby, wanting to be first at anything, maybe she can be first to have the unearned dame taken off her for destroying New Zealand. It was a total travesty giving it to her, a damehood, and giving Doomfield a knighthood. Disgusting abuse of the honours system. Anonymous says, National did have a good election. We've never had a media landscape like this, being paid for and in the pocket of Labour. National did well just to keep their head down. The media gaslit the movie too, still not reading the room. Did Rachel see River of Freedom at the embassy? They held out a long time to play it. Yes, Rachel did see the River of Freedom movie, and she gave us our thoughts on that. The patrons of National Enact are the rich pricks. I assume that when the Nats didn't do a deal with Winston but tried to take him out, Paula Bennett, they were following orders. Winston made serious wine box enemies who have egos too and want his head on a plate. It's the only rational explanation I can see here. National couldn't be that stupid. Cheers for the program, Steve. And Julian writes and says, "Hi Cam, really enjoyed that interview with Rachel, and in fact I'm enjoying all of your others. I am right of centre but enjoy different perspectives, from Sean Plunkett, Leighton Smith to the working group. I particularly miss Rachel's pieces in the Herald, but believe she went the way of Michael Bassett. Keep up the good work." And one comment, a long one from Mark about New Zealand First. We need Winston Peters. It's a mad, mad world when supposedly 90% of Kiwis reckon Ardern and Hipkins were economic morons, yet 90% of them believed to be health experts. Most, with the exception of no jab, no job victims, willingly inserted a jab into their bodies with ingredients unknown for a virus that was no more dangerous than the common cold. All this on a politician's say-so. Ironically, the same people who had a choice would not buy a new vehicle without a 5-year warranty, but would happily take a novel experimental drug without any indemnity or legal recourse if things went wrong with their health. Go figure. It's a mad, mad world when the same people would protest profusely against the production of GMO-modified foods, or would happily insert this gene-modifying drug that alters the cells of their bodies with known and unknown adverse events. And it's a mad, mad world when people start to believe that a single source of truth, together with proposed legislation to censor misinformation or disinformation as per Orwell's 1984, is needed for freedom of speech. Yes, the world has morphed from mad to the insane, but nothing will compare to this madness if the system allows an adult man to follow my 8-year-old granddaughter into a public toilet. My being will then be removed from all civilized thoughts and emotional restraint. In the aftermath, I hope the judicial system will treat me with compassion. Therefore, before it comes to that, I hope Winston wins the up-and-coming by-election and comes home with a wet sail with the special votes. I need, and we need, New Zealand First to restore our civil sensibilities and pride in what is simply right for our children and our society as a whole. We'll also need to understand that our existentialistic crisis is not the bogus climate change planned epidemics, cabal militants, or gender identification, or who or what determines misinformation, but with ourselves and our politicians who can have the guts to bring back spiritual and moral values to rebalance and correct this insane world. And Mark, that is a brilliant letter to finish the mailbag this week, and we'll have more correspondence next week.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Right, that's it for The Crunch this week. Wasn't it interesting to get Liam Here's perspective on how the National Party fared in the election? National supporters must be feeling a little bit disappointed. Their last-minute scare tactics regarding coalition negotiations seem to have failed, and they didn't make it over the 40% mark against the worst government ever. The very thing they've sought to avoid, negotiating with Winston Peters, seems increasingly likely to happen, as will a three-party coalition. It all comes down to the special votes, and with 20% of the vote still to be counted, expect some changes. But there are some fundamental things wrong with our society and economy, and Liam is probably right that the new government is going to have to knuckle down and focus on simple but crucial things like getting the cost of living under control, addressing the rampant violent crime in society, and fundamentally fixing the health system before we can tackle more complex issues. We certainly have a few years of hard yakka ahead of us, and that's why we are here at Reality Check Radio to give you all sides of any story or issue, to discuss those meaty issues and thrash them out, and it's a job that we all love doing. If you're using the RCR app, and you really should be, you can easily get all our replays on there as well as listen live. And I have to give a big thanks for the team that helps put together this show each week and makes it all work. I'm truly grateful for their support, from Bex, my producer, to Dave and Charlie keeping everything tight in the back end, to Liz for collating the mailbag. Thanks to you all. It's been a real pleasure having you all back again this week. I'm loving your feedback, including the brickbats, and really enjoy talking to so many people sharing their thoughts on politics, life, faith, and everything in between. But politics is like rust. It never sleeps. So here at The Crunch, we'll continue holding the politicians' feet to the fire. And a big shout out to all of you, and thank you for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore this beautiful game of politics. Don't forget email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview. And let's make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Now stay tuned for a breakfast show repeat coming up next, with features including Money Talks with my pal Farzan Irani and Perigo's Perspective with the one and only Lindsay Perigo. Looking forward to having you join me again next Thursday at 4 p.m. for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.